I'm Mr. Ghost. This channel is new, but the nightmares are just beginning. If you enjoy true horror, consider subscribing, and let's dive into the darkness. My friend works part-time as a Lyft Uber driver around the Ogden metro area, and recently shared this story with me. Normally I work remotely from home, checking security certificates and filing reports. It doesn't sound like much, but it can be an all-day job. Once a month my job requires me to show up at the Salt Lake City office for a mandatory in-person meeting. Asterisk. Note this story is from his perspective. I activated the app, and within minutes, several potential riders pinging. I looked over the ones in my immediate vicinity, and most of them were only going as far as a mile, which I figured wouldn't be as rewarding to me financially. I saw one that wanted to be picked up here in SLC, and be driven all the way out to Ogden. That's where I was going anyway, and I accepted the rider. Long story short, the rider was a normal college-age female with a friend. I dropped her and her friend off at the destination in the Weber State University parking lot, pressed drop off and perused the app for other potential riders since I figured I had at least one more in me. One particular ride request had suddenly appeared. Around early summer of 2022, I was leaving SLC to head back home to Ogden for the day when I remembered that I had installed the Uber app and had registered as a driver some time ago. While I had never actually picked up a rider before, I figured that the drive from SLC to Ogden might earn me some nice spending money. And since it was during the active hours, it was around 1 p.m., I was destined to get a bite somewhere. The pickup location wasn't far and was in the vicinity of Ogden itself, and the destination was all the way into Clearfield, which was a good 3 towns over. So I accepted and thought nothing of it. As I continued on the road, I noticed that the pickup location was something like Ogden 10th Ave and Martin Hilltop Doctor, which sounded familiar but didn't immediately stand out to me. So after zigzagging through some little suburbs and one or two good busy streets is when I come to it. And then it dawned on me, Ogden 10th Ave and Martin Hilltop Doctor is at the fucking cemetery. I had a thought that perhaps it was a glitch in the system. Uber's navigation and tracking has never exactly been 1-1, and it routinely leads drivers to pick up locations that are inaccurate. I decided to test it by canceling the ride. I sat waiting in my car, phone in hand, waiting to see if the potential rider would perhaps reset its location or something. But no, it was still there, pinging from the Ogden cemetery. I pulled over out of the way of traffic. Parallel parking at the curb directly across the street from the cemetery. By this time it was something like 3 o'clock or 3:30 p.m. Traffic from SLC to Ogden has always been hectic. It was still light out, but it didn't change the fact that my rider was pinging from the Ogden cemetery. I wondered if perhaps it was just someone without a car, who was visiting the grave of a deceased loved one. It was recently Memorial Day, which in my mind made sense. It didn't make accepting the ride a second time and proceeding through into the actual cemetery any easier. I reviewed the details, and as it turned out I was already pretty close to my pickup. It was a section of the cemetery intersection 10 Avenue and Martin Hilltop Drive, which was near the very back, far left corner of the place. If you've never been or aren't from Ogden, Utah, the cemetery here is huge and sprawling, filled with many graves from the Pioneer and World War II eras. On the drive into the Ogden City Cemetery, it was deserted, like there was no one around. There were, however, signs that people had been in and out in the past few days, paying respects to their loved ones, as many graves had been decorated with patriotic decor and flowers. The idea that it might be a disabled or carless person, just needing a ride from visiting their deceased relative, was comforting, but not enough to ease away the butterflies in my stomach. I glanced at the details again, and the alleged rider's name was C. Cunningham. Odd, I thought, as usually it would only list a first name and no initials. I continued along the drive, noticing that as I progressed through the cemetery, more and more headstones began to look dilapidated, displaced, or outright destroyed. Also in this area, the trees have taken on a very odd appearance of bulging at the trunk, giving the appearance of being pregnant. I think it's called a burl or burr. and has something to do with a deformed growth from within the tree's ecosystem. On the trees, one thing that my mind randomly conjured up was an old elementary school memory of some of my peers on the playground, informing me that those pregnant trees, for lack of a better term, were in fact evil. The bulging was caused by a ghost or spirit, desperate to regain a living body that it possessed a tree, and became stuck and created the abnormal appearance. I thought that was all hogwash, but of course driving through a cemetery road lined with several of these dead and honestly demonic-looking trees makes me feel less confident in my original assertion. I came up on 10 Ave. It was along the evil tree-lined street. Lots of decayed, toppled over, and outright destroyed headstones, and they appear to have very little in the way of care to them. These graves were old. Like, really old. If you've seen any documentary on Salem, witchcraft or Halloween in old America, then you've seen the types of headstones, slate gray or solid white. The epitaph, more or less erased from decades of sun decay. Likely these graves have no living relatives to visit them, which explains the lack of flowers or Memorial Day decor. In 500 yards, pickup C, Cunningham. My GPS droned out in that dreadful monotone voice. As I rounded the bend, I dropped my car to a crawl. I could see pretty clear ahead of me now that I was away from the trees. But I saw no one. They might still be paying respects at a grave, I thought. In 200 yards, pickup C, Cunningham. Well, I can easily see 200 yards ahead of me. And I saw no one or nothing waiting for me. Martin Hilltop Drive. It was just around the bend and curved straight back and around. My rider is very near now. What's unsettling is that there are lots, and I mean hundreds of graves in this cemetery, as well as bigger pine trees, that obscures my view and prevents me from seeing who may be waiting for me ahead. I kept the car crawling, slowly inching my way through the old cemetery road, eyeing the different graves on either side, until I came to an abrupt end. The very corner of the road, a particularly dead-looking tree, overhangs some indiscernible graves. Pickup C, Cunningham. My GPS blurted out plainly. I looked around on either side of the street. There's no way anyone is waiting for me here. Because there was no one here, I decided to wait for one solid minute. And if I didn't, someone approached the car from around that ugly tree, then I was canceling and getting the hell out of there. Pickup T, Cunningham. My GPS ordered once again, like a drill sergeant issuing a command. That's it. It had been 1 full minute and no one was coming, because there was nobody to get. Eyeing the area once more before taking off. My eyes did notice a couple of distinctly older-looking headstones nestled quietly underneath the overgrown ugly tree. None of them stood out to me as being noteworthy, but they were remarkably old, like probably Prohibition or Civil War era old. Feeling spooked enough as it was, I floored it out of there. My GPS didn't hesitate to scold me again. In 1 yard, in 5 yards, in half a mile, pickup C, Cunningham. This had to be a glitch, I thought, as I reached for my phone. In 2 miles, pickup C, Cunningham. The GPS once again commanded. I was ready to cancel and shut the GPS up for the night, but as I reached to cancel, my eyes caught notice of something startling in the ride details. Rider C, Cunningham. Location, of course, was the Ogden Cemetery, but the destination, Clearfield. Not just anywhere in Clearfield, no. It wanted dropped off at the Clearfield Cemetery. I instantly hit cancel and got the hell out of Dodge. Pickup C, Cunningham. My GPS droned again. I reached for the lock button and locked all of the doors of my car without second thought. If there really was someone in need of a ride, then they could verify their order as they approach. Keeping my hands in a death grip on the steering wheel, I gazed into the rear-view mirror, having a thought that someone could in fact be trying to stealthily enter my car or pull a weapon on me. Ogden does have a criminal element and a small gang presence, even if diminished due to recent gentrification projects throughout the city. Even so, I didn't want to risk it. Could it have been wannabe gang members looking for an easy mark or a target for an initiation? Perhaps. Was it just someone's sick idea of a joke? Could be. It is possible to set a location for a pickup while not physically being in the area. Was it just a glitch in the system? Again, possible. But seeing as how the same ride request for the same person in the same location to the same destination has been active for weeks after this initial encounter, I'm going to say no. Was it a ghost? Honestly, I don't know. I know a lot of people hate it when others immediately jump to the shivers paranormal as a possible explanation. And this incident could very well have been something as mundane as the above mentioned. However, something deep inside about this whole thing just doesn't sit right with me. Like what sane, well-adjusted, mentally stable person would commit to doing this bizarre and rather scary request? Once was bad enough, but to keep at it for weeks after the fact, that's dedication. I felt too creeped out to immediately drive home, and my mom had warned me against going directly home from places where spirits are active. I drove out to a nearby Maverick, bought some drinks and sat in the parking lot for what felt like an hour, or until I felt reasonably sure I could go home without something latching on and following me. A few months later, I was bored, and out of curiosity, I checked the Lyft and Uber apps for potential riders again. And once again, I found the mysterious C. Cunningham, still waiting for a ride acceptance, clear out at 10 Avenue and Martin Hilltop Drive at the Ogden City Cemetery. And even if it was just a person and not a ghost doing it, that individual is probably not someone I'd want to meet, much less have them in my car. I have since deleted my Lyft and Uber apps after that, and now only work DoorDash for part-time monetary income. This will probably get annoying for both of us, but I have to change a few names in this post. Basically, I signed a non-disclosure agreement with a certain corporation, and I'm not even supposed to be sharing what I'm about to say. Changing the names will at least give me some little shred of legal safety. In fact, for legal purposes, I'll go ahead and say this story is completely fictional, and any relation to real-world events is a total coincidence. Plus, let's be honest, any attempts at tracing this to me will not work, but you're welcome to try. So, there's this company called Zillion that I'm sure you've all heard of. They're probably one of the most well-known corporations in the world, and everyone with an internet connection has definitely used their search engine at least once. Zillion started out with a simple motto: never be bad. The idea was that they were a different sort of company, one that actually cared about the users, their happiness, and above all else, their privacy. That last concern went out the window pretty quickly. Now it's all about serving targeted advertisements and collecting data. I've heard that Zillion itself has more information on citizens than any government in the world. All of this is why I was highly skeptical about their intent when they launched the donational project. They claimed it was the next step in crowdfunding and charitable giving. But I'm sure I wasn't alone in thinking there had to be some major catches. The premise was simple enough. 2 randomly selected applicants to the program, one male, one female, would be given the new Zillion Specs internet-connected glasses to wear during every waking moment. A group of 100 other applicants would then be able to watch a live stream of these 2 subjects at any time they chose, using a very secure browser-based control panel through Zillion's subsidiary video platform ViewPipe. In other words, you could see through the eyes of these 2 subjects at pretty much any time of day. The only time the glasses were allowed to be disconnected from streaming by contract was between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That was to allow for sleep, showers, etc. Exceptions could be made for bathroom breaks, but Zillion seemed oddly specific about their duration in the original application process. Now, on to the crowdfunding aspect. The 100 viewers were given randomly assigned names combining an adjective and an animal name. For example, users would be known as Red Shark, Purple Flea, etc. These users also each received a healthy daily allowance of ZID points, which they could send to the 2 streamers at any point they chose. Points would roll over from day to day, and if the project had officially launched, these points would have been purchased with real-world currency. If you're lost by now, I guess I would sum up the whole thing like this. Viewers watch the streamers in their day-to-day lives and give their Z points to a streamer when they want to support them. In practice, I suppose the final service would have allowed viewers to enter the donational website, select what kind of personal project they wanted to support, and then monitor the work and deeds of whoever represented the cause and wore the Zillion specs. Streamers would then be able to withdraw the Z points in the form of real money, with Zillion taking their cut. Of course, right away, Blue Mule was a problem. I saw him in one of the stream chats on the very first day, when the streams began. I had started off watching the male subject, dubbed Keith, though I'm sure it wasn't his real name. Blue Mule was an obvious troll. There were strict moderators in place to keep chat from getting unruly, but I could tell he was testing the limits. He knew exactly what to say and how to say it, in order to avoid actually triggering punishment. He'd twist the arm just enough before it broke. At one point, Blue Mule asked if Keith was gay after the streamer had randomly looked at a passing man's body on the street. When people asked why he would say that, he explained that he was just wondering if Zillion was representing the LGBT properly. I don't think anyone believed that, but there was no real way to prove his concern wasn't legitimate. Blue Mule is actually the reason I switched from watching Keith's stream to watching Kelly's. The moderator presence was kind of having a chilling effect on the flow of the chat, and I didn't enjoy the extra surveillance he was forcing on us. Kelly was an interesting choice for the program, whereas Keith was the standard blonde surfer dude who was hoping to get funding for a new board and gear. Kelly was looking for help with her terminally ill mother, and possibly opening a dress shop if that funding goal was met. She seemed sad, all the time. It wasn't something incredibly obvious, but when we watched through her eyes and heard her speak, there was always a little bit of a dark cloud in her voice. She enjoyed an ice cream cone, strawberry cheesecake I think, but went on to say it reminded her of when her mom took her out for ice cream. She saw a stray cat and stopped to pet it, then asked if it used to have a warm bed before it was thrown out. Everything had that sort of depressing tinge to it, which I guess is why she wasn't getting anywhere near the same Z points that Keith was. As the days went on, viewers helped Keith pick which type of board he was going to buy, what graphics it would have, and so on. It quickly became a system of putting numbers into the stream chat to signal which choice would win. Almost as quickly, Keith realized his missed opportunity and switched to making us vote with Z points. Donate now for this design. Okay, donate now for this one. And so on. Very smart, though not subtle. Kelly had a day where her grand total of Z points earned came to 200, barely anything. And before Zillion's cut, she had spent the day in bed, not saying anything, with her Zillion specs on the nightstand, facing an empty section of her bedroom. Some of us speculated that she had gotten a bad call about her mother during the stream's downtime, but no one knew for sure. At first, people sent her Z points to try to cheer her up, but Blue Mule had come over at this point and helpfully stated that she wouldn't see the donation alerts if she wasn't wearing the glasses. It went downhill from there, far and fast. They didn't care if she had tears in her eyes or snot in her nose. The fact that she was crying did little to stop what was happening. It didn't take a brain surgeon to figure it out. Kelly realized that she was getting donations when she was in front of the mirror. Donations that grew when she would adjust her top and would shrink if she was doing her makeup or just primping in general. I don't know how serious the situation was with her mom, but Kelly went to a very dark place, and Blue Mule was there to crack every borderline joke possible. Kelly outpaced Keith in donations when her streams became largely about trying on bathing suits. Painting her toenails and putting lotion on her feet weren't as popular, but had their own dedicated fan base with Z points to burn. She ended up looking completely defeated. There was a definite clause about nudity in the application we'd seen, but in the same way Blue Mule knew how to avoid a ban, Kelly became an expert at showing everything but. I started watching Keith again, after it became apparent this was going to be Kelly's life going forward. The chat moderators seemed oddly tight-lipped about the direction things had taken, as if they'd been notified by higher-ups that they needed to be very careful about not supporting or condemning the behavior. After all, this was all data for the test run, right? Keith's streams were boring and predictable as I'd expected, especially after the descent into depravity I had just witnessed. After he was basically getting nothing in terms of Z points, He was far less interested in interacting with the chat. He would do things like wear the zillion specks on his forehead, angled at the ceiling, while he watched television or viewpipe videos. I was in Keith's stream when Kelly was killed. I phrase it that way because I'll always blame the viewers for what happened. Someone popped into Keith's chat and shouted, in caps lock, that everyone needed to come to Kelly's stream right away. Watching Keith's ceiling fan spin wasn't really doing much for me, so I switched over quickly. As was now usual in Kelly's streams, I could see a mirror. The zillion specks were lying on the bathroom counter, and the sink was painted with red streaks. A previously white towel was now entirely damp and crimson. I asked what was going on, but the chat was flying by at this point, and I could tell people were already tired of explaining the situation to a constant stream of newcomers. I only found out later that someone had been funneling an extreme amount of Z points into Kelly's account. Someone who had apparently saved all of their points they had donated to no one until that very night. They started coming in when Kelly got a paper cut and looked at the blood on her finger for a split second. She noticed, and putting two and two together quickly, tried making a small cut on the palm of her hand. Blood, money, more blood, more money, lots of blood, lots of money. Eventually she must have hit an artery by mistake. In an instant, Zillion shut the chat down, and the camera feed went black. Keith's stream was down too. The chat still racing. Within moments, the URL wasn't even reachable. It was like the project hadn't even existed. I mean, you'd have to be kind of stupid to not see what company I'm referring to. Here, go ahead and try to find any mention of them running a crowd-funding social experiment using their patented internet-connected lenses and video streaming website. It's completely whitewashed. H asterisk. 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 This is probably why they stopped promoting those lenses in the first place. Those of us seeking answers set up a small private group to discuss what exactly had happened. Unfortunately, in our haste, we put it right on Zillion's failed social media platform, Zillion Sphere, and it was found and deleted on the third day it existed. What I did find out, however, was this. Blue Mule was probably far worse than any of us even realized. One member of the group said he had chatted with the user at one point, asking what he did or didn't give Z points for. It was a common question at the time, since everyone was anonymous and we could only really connect with each other by discussing the project. Blue Mule's answer was innocuous at the time, but given his penchant for wordplay and pushing boundaries, it's taken on a much more chilling tone. Now, I'm saving mine for when someone really opens up to me. I don't know what Zillion was thinking, really. Someone as obviously sick and antagonistic as Blue Mule should never have gotten past the first phases of test group selection. What's more, it seemed like they didn't even take any action after the fact. I can't say for sure, since this isn't first-hand information, but multiple sources in the group remember Blue Mule dropping a few hints about his true identity. Again, something that was expressly forbidden. If you watch Viewpipe, you've seen me. It's a disturbing thought, to say the least. Who would be so important to Zillion that they'd not only let him into the project despite all red flags, but would also protect him to that degree? If Zillion has its way, I suppose we'll never know. I work unorthodox hours at an unorthodox job in an unorthodox place. For those who don't know, a trap house is a place where drugs are bought, sold, and produced, a haven for illicit activities. That's where I clock in 7 days a week, though, instead of a house, this is a trap warehouse, a 2-story building located in the industrial area of our city, complete with 2 incredibly large indoor grows, a mother clone room, a lab for making concentrates, and a large loft where we party and hold meetings. There's also a small disgusting bathroom, and last but not least, the room where I spend 12 hours a day from 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. A small office with way too many fluorescent lights, white walls, white linoleum floors, a computer chair, a shotgun, and about 20 screens of every type and size. Some are old TVs, some new, some big, some small, as well as random computer monitors here and there, all sloppily wired together. Each one displays different live camera footage of the various rooms, the surrounding areas outside the building, the parking lot, the front gate, the sides of the building, behind the building, etc. The screens and shotgun are the tools of my job. In this industry, a group of young men doesn't reach this level of trapping without a good amount of lying, cheating, and stealing. So there is a definite need for constant surveillance. We are always at risk of retaliation, unknown people attempting to rob us, employees stealing, cops patrolling, etc. The screens and shotgun are a necessity. They often save our lives and keep losses at a minimum. You'd imagine there'd be a lot of excitement in this setting, and you'd be right. When there is. But when it's just me, the screens, a shotgun, and a PS4 for 12 hours a night, and nothing has happened in 2 weeks, and everyone else is out of town, it's a pretty mellow job. Sure, if things get too mellow, we have an endless supply of liquor, nitrous weed, dabs, and a little emergency cocaine for when it's really difficult to stay awake. But I'm just not feeling that tonight. It's one of those nights I want nothing more than to kick back, relax, watch these screens, and play Skyrim for 12 hours straight. This game is insane. You open it up, and before you know it, 5 hours have passed. It's already 2 a.m. If you ask me, I would have told you it was probably 9:45 p.m. The passage of time seems strange when the screens display a night, so still that the only signs of movement are the fans causing the plants to sway in their rooms, and the clouds drifting across the outside cameras. Then, the strangest thing starts happening. I'm focused on my game when I hear dishes clanking and the chatter of a room full of joyous people, as if they're having drinks and dinner. Yet, when I look at the camera, it's just a room full of pot plants swaying in the artificial wind. I quickly open the door to peek inside. But it's pointless. It's pitch black. The only reason I can see the plants on the screen is because of the night vision. Still, it's dark enough to confirm there isn't a full-blown gathering happening inside. The second I open the door, the sounds stop. When I return to my chair and refocus on my game or the cameras, the noises start again. It's been about an hour. And though the constant sounds from the room haven't stopped, that's no longer my main concern. The unexplained merriment in the empty room next door is definitely unsettling, but not terrifying. Something else has come to my attention. The longer I ignore the noise, the closer this deep, bassy murmuring gets to my ear. At first it sounded like a distant car subwoofer, but as it creeps nearer, I realize it's not music. It's a deep, guttural voice rambling in indecipherable murmurs and hums. The more I try to distract myself, the closer it gets, until I can feel the vibrations of the voice tickling my earlobe. Then, all at once, my focus shifts to a screen. The front gate. A single person is walking down the road toward me. It's 3 a.m. No one ever walks up to our gate at 3 a.m. with good intentions, so I grab the shotgun and walk out to meet him. I stand there, waiting for someone to approach, but no one does. I call out. No response. After another 10 minutes of standing there and peeking around the corner to see if anyone is lingering, I realize there's no one. I go back into the office, set the shotgun down, take off my jacket, and start to settle back in. But when I glance at the screen showing the gate, I see the same person standing there, motionless, 5 feet back from the entrance, staring. Again, I grab the shotgun, quickly walk outside, aim the gun, and shout, "Can I help you?" As I get closer to the gate, I can see through the plastic slots, and there's no one there. I throw open the gate. Still no one. No one up the road. No one down the road. I lock the gate as quickly as I can and rush back inside. I check every screen, expecting to see him running behind the warehouse or climbing a fence, but he's not on any of the cameras. Except one. He's still standing 5 feet in front of the gate. I refresh the feed, thinking it might be frozen, but the clouds are still moving above. My anxiety spikes. The murmuring behind my ear intensifies. The party sounds escalate. Not just merriment anymore, but shouting. An argument, voices rising. I run outside. Nothing. I run back inside. He's at the gate. The shouting gets louder. I run outside. No one. The murmuring is so loud it feels like it's inside me. I run back inside. He's still there. It's now 4 a.m. Dawn is beginning to break, and there's just enough light outside to make out details. I zoom in on the gate, and as the voices in the room next door escalate into full-blown screaming, I finally see his face clearly. It sends me, wearing the same clothes I have on. My own face staring back at me. All the sounds stop. The only thing I hear is my own heartbeat. I'm not too proud to admit I'm about to shit myself. So I walk into the bathroom, lock the door, and sit on the toilet, hoping to regain my composure. Finally, the silence is a relief. I close my eyes, try to shake it off. Probably just sleep deprivation. I tell myself I need a few days off. I open my eyes and see a little mouse looking up at me. Gross, but also weirdly adorable. Right as I have that thought, the mouse starts screeching and running in perfect circles. In that instant, the voices explode into full chaos. Dishes shattering, screams, the sounds of wrenching and vomiting, the deep vibrating murmuring is now inside me, shaking my bones. My suck done. I pinch off my shit. Forgo wiping, run to my car and open the gate, and there I am, standing, staring, gaze fixated on me. I have no interest in him anymore. No more questions. I just want to get the fuck out. The next day, I return for a shift and a meeting. The warehouse is alive again. At least 20 people hustling, working, partying, bullshitting. I tell my buddy what happened. He listens then, to my surprise, simply says, "I need to show you something." He takes me to the bathroom. On the floor, I see a mouse. On its back, rib cage broken, exposed, like something had eaten it from the inside out. Everyone has their story. Your mother's memory about playing with a Ouija board when she was younger. Your father's recollection of hearing noises while camping in the woods with friends. Your siblings' tales of goblins and ghouls that you know deep down were only told to scare you. My dad had one before he passed about a terrifying and ugly demon who lived in our family mansion for 19 years. Jacob, my older brother. But all jokes aside, I'm here to talk about mine. It was around 2015. Sometime in October. That year was particularly painful for my family as my father had finally lost his battle with cancer that spring. He entrusted his estate to me, his only daughter, as I was set to take over his position in the family company. To make a long story short though, I let my brother Jacob, his girlfriend Veronica, and dog Zeus room with me in that mansion. The last thing I wanted to do was sulk around, all alone in Dracula's castle before my own inevitable demise. Even though it was spacious and probably worth more than the planet itself, there was always something so off about it. Rather, something was so incredibly off about the surrounding town. Dark Hallow. Even the town's name feels straight out of some Stephen King novel. There our estate stood, looming over the foggy, sleepy town perched upon the mountain like a gargoyle prepared to feast on unsuspecting prey. It was particularly foggy driving up through the dense woods. Upon leaving the last few remnants of green foliage behind, the jagged curves and edges of the Kramer estate pierced through the melancholic moonlight. All was normal that night. Driving up to my childhood home, Jadis, the maid and her husband Josiah, our groundskeeper, were just leaving for the night. Exiting my car, the air meandered in a silent waltz with the amorphous fog engulfing the land. That silence, however, it felt visceral and insidious somehow. I had no tangible reason to worry, but I couldn't help feeling as if I needed to hurry inside. While rummaging through my keys under the stone archways, I finally spotted it. Sitting atop the welcome mat, laid a simple CD. It announced itself in red print. The Lamb. Curiosity clawed its way up to the forefront of my mind. That persistence led me to a decision I'd regret for the rest of my life.
What's that?
Veronica asked as I sauntered into the foyer. It sets the lamb, I teased while presenting the disc to Veronica and Jacob. It was in front of the door when I got home. You guys didn't see who dropped it off? Nah. I didn't even know someone came today, Jacob admitted while Veronica nodded. My eyes fixated on the strange item now in my possession. Hey Jake, can you go get my laptop from the kitchen? Veronica sat with me in the living room, and Jacob wandered in with my laptop. I took the laptop from his hands and shoved the disc into the player. To be honest, I don't fully know what I expected. Maybe some awful local artist's mixtape or something. But a video was the last thing on my mind for some reason. The laptop screen lit up with the static remnants of what was obviously once a VHS tape. The crackly screen occasionally gave way to a viewable image of a nun playing an acoustic guitar to a group of children. She kept singing the song "Tonight You Belong to Me," a slightly creepy in retrospect oldie, almost as if she was on repeat. What kind of fuck-ass prank is this? Jacob bellowed as Veronica, and I laughed at his intrusion. But just before I ejected the CD and cleared my laptop of any potential viruses, Veronica noticed something. Her face. The nun in the video began to lose something about her. Almost like her essence of humanity seemed to disappear. The only way I could describe it nowadays is as if her face slowly started to become AI generated, moving in unnatural and impossible ways. She no longer sang her song, but some demented version of it, like it was stuck on a short loop somewhere in the beginning and reversed. That was around the time I removed the CD and tossed it in the garbage. The next couple days were fairly normal. What with Jacob being away for work that week, although I do recount the unexplained bumping and knocking at night that I could only rationalize away as the old mansion settling. Garbage day eventually came around, and off our trash went to the dump. That day definitely had a few more odd creaks around the mansion than normal, but nothing that rang any alarm bells. It was roughly around 2 o'clock in the morning when I felt Veronica nudge me awake. "Get up," she hurriedly whispered while tugging my arm. "Wah." Before I could even move, she all but yanked me out of bed. "Where sits the gun?" "What? What do you need the gun for?" My eyes finally adjusted to the pitch black. Her eyes stared back at me, displaying only primal fear. There sits someone in my room. It felt like my heart just ceased, like there was a giant cavity where it should have been. I quietly grabbed the handgun from my nightstand and wandered out into the murky void of the hallway. The moonlight was no longer melancholic as it slithered through the window panes. Its malicious tendrils created unholy shapes out of the things in the dark. We silently reached her room, and I slowly grasped for the handle. Each crashing creak of her door sent chills down my spine, alerting my brain of some impending doom. Her room was as silent as a crypt, but in no way did it feel as lifeless as one. Veronica flipped the light switch on and we scoured her room for anyone who might have been there. Nothing. She sighed out of relief as we left her room. But before I could even turn to face her, something clawed its way through the still air of the mansion's winding corridors. Creak. I hauled ass downstairs towards the noise, making my way through the twisting and oblique hallways, gun in hand. Veronica and I finally stopped in the kitchen, staring intently at the now wide-open back door. Sitting there on the kitchen island was a single small disc, the LAN. Veronica got on the phone with the police as I closed and locked the back door. We turned on every light in that damn mansion and watched cartoons in the downstairs living room while waiting for the cops. The officers must have arrived 20 or so minutes later. We greeted Officer Reynolds, a pale man who looked like he did bodybuilding on the side, and Officer Carmichael, a friendly woman with darker skin. Reynolds and Carmichael did their rounds through the mansion, finding nothing. I remember Officer Carmichael talking to us, while Officer Reynolds seemed fixated on something in the backyard. Officer Reynolds told the three of us that he would look outside, while Carmichael continued taking our statements. It must have only been about 20 seconds until all three of us jumped at the sound of Reynolds slamming the back door. He walked into view visibly shaking with his skin, even paler than before. "We need to leave," he uttered to Carmichael. And just like that, The two of us were left alone within that god-forsaken house. Needless to say, Veronica slept in my bed that night with Zeus. Have you ever just felt like someone's watching you even if no one's there? That's what the next day was like. Constant eyes peering from every shadow in that damned mansion. It was only made worse by Zeus's newfound interest in the vents and closets. He'd give them his little sniff-spections and then just stare. Even the allure of treats couldn't break him from whatever was entrancing him. That day I tried going about my routine as best I could. I cleaned the east wing of the mansion with Jadis, cleaned the music room and locked it up, made a late breakfast, took Zeus outside, locked the music room up, watched TV, and then locked the music room up. That day was also accompanied by the occasional banging at the door. Knock, 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 always in threes. Jacob's going to be gone an extra 3 days. Veronica alerted while I closed the music room door for what seemed like the 10th time that day. You told him about last night. Sid's little spook, right? Yeah. And of course he thinks we just spooked each other being alone. She giggled, but I could still see terror in her eyes. You cert welcome to crash in my room for the time being. That house was already eerie enough, as is prior to the Lamb showing up. A mansion that felt as old as time itself. Its architecture twisted and turned as its cavernous hallways felt like they led to endless voids of shadow. The foyer opened like a castle into a dark unknown, as the chandeliers leered overhead. Those open cavernous rooms carried the echoes of those 3 knocks as the clock struck midnight. Veronica perked up from the ottoman. She was lounging on, her nose no longer buried in the Brandon Sanderson novel she was reading. We stared at each other long enough to communicate without a single word spoken. Who the hell was at our door at this time of night? She lunged from her seat and ran towards the nightstand, grabbing the handgun. I clutched onto the bat from my closet, and we both wandered through the jagged halls of murky black. The both of us quietly crept across the carpeted landing of the grand staircase and traversed down into the foyer. The front doors loomed before us, their haunting windows gazing upon us both like prey. But the strange part is how nothing stood outside in the misty moonlight. Nothing was at our door. I should have called the cops again as a precaution, yet I felt silly for entertaining that idea. With nothing being at the mansion, Veronica huffed as the shape of her white nightgown fluttered back up the staircase. I quickly followed suit. We were back within the dim marmalade light of my bedroom, within a matter of seconds. Should we call a psychic? Veronica rubbed her hands together as worry plastered her freckled face. I meandered over to the vanity, bags staining the underside of my eyes. Don't tell Jacob. He's so gonna make fun of us. Knock, knock, knock. I felt the blood freeze under my skin. Veronica stared at me with a crazed panic seeping into her eyes. It wasn't at the front door this time. It was at my bedroom door. My fingers ached from the frost that now enveloped them. Zeus stood and stalked toward the bedroom door, the hair down his back sticking straight up like spines. I slowly stood from the vanity with the bat. As Veronica readied the handgun, my trembling hands threw the door open as Veronica took aim out into the nothingness of the mansion's vast hallways. The hallways lingered with emptiness, but that presence from the night before persisted. I don't know fully what it was, but both of us had the feeling that that door needed to be shut, and we need not speak of what just happened. Something was playing with us. Or was it taunting us? Either way, giving it the attention it sought would have only made it more active. We simply tried our best to sleep. Every howl of wind outside woke me. Chairs morphed into things in the dark corners of my room, and every snap of the house settling echoed like footsteps down the hallway just outside. The next morning I met with Jadis and cleaned the west wing. I put my books back up on their shelves, replaced the tablecloth in the dining room, vacuumed the game room, and put my books back up on their shelves again. Night eventually rolled around, and I said my goodbyes to Jadis and Josiah. The foyer fell silent as I glided my way up the staircase and wandered through the twisting galleries of family portraits. The shapes tucked away within the maroon wallpaper formed dancing, little spirals leading back to my nightly safe haven. Veronica slept, her auburn hair peeking from the duvet. The comfort of another person being there lent to a swift whirl of sleep. Night crept on until something stirred me from my dreams. Paws hit the floor outside my bedroom and jogged to the other end of the hall. I quietly maneuvered from under the sheets and tiptoed to my door. I questioned to myself what I was doing, but the unmistakable clinks of a dog collar emanated through the hallway. My hand moved without thought, unlatching my door. I tried my best to peer down the hallway but couldn't make anything out in the pitch black. I looked like a total cliché as I grabbed the electric lantern from atop my dresser and slowly wandered down the passage in my blue robe. I finally managed to reach the corner of the hall and gazed down at the end. Pouring at Veronica and Jacob's door was Zeus. His little claws dragged on the door as if desperate to escape the darkness of the mansion's hallways. Proust. Zeus, I loudly whispered in a desperate bid for his attention. My voice bounced off the mahogany walls. Zeus lunged his head back to look at me in the moonlight. Something was extremely off about that movement, almost as if he didn't know his own strength, breaking his neck to look for me. His eyes pierced through the insidious darkness, just staring at me. He finally stood up and turned his body around to face me. That's when I noticed what looked like foam spewing from his mouth in the shadows. Zeus, come here. I worriedly whispered at him. His voyeuristic gaze was lured away from my presence, drifting towards the deep black hallway behind me. That's when I heard the pitter-patter of paws and the clinking of a dog collar skulk behind me, as Zeus and Veronica emerged from the hallway. "What are you doing, Amy?" she asked. I froze, looking at the Zeus who had arrived with her now standing at my side and peering down the corridor. I couldn't respond to her. I could only point at the other dog lurking at the edge of the shadows across the hall. Veronica's eyes went wide as she noticed the creature within our mansion. It began to lurch forward, as if just learning how to walk. Its broken waltz faded into the shadows of the hallway where the moonlight couldn't reach. Zeus let out a deep growl as the creature merged into the murky shadows. We could only stand there as still as the dying air until a crackling made itself known. My eyes ignited with fear as the crackling source conjured into view. Brokenly lunging down the hallway was the twisted, unearthly silhouette of what should have been a person. Its arms extended before it with disturbing cracks as its spine and head slithered in unnatural motions. Veronica hauled Zeus into her arms, sprinting down the hallway with me in tow. A rage of clawing tore through that hall as I tumbled down the stairs after Veronica. We stumbled down the curving corridors until we made it to the grand staircase. Upon reaching our exit, that creature let its sickening rage known with one final wail, ripping through the foyer. We stumbled out of that house and into my car, leaving that mansion behind in a crazed hysteria. We ended up at a motel, running on nothing but pure and unadulterated fear. That night was accompanied by paranoid bouts and a lack of sleep. Our week was spent slowly going insane, locked away within a single dingy motel room. The only thing either of us could think about was Jacob's return. That day couldn't inch closer in our minds if it tried. On the day of his arrival, we called Esther Linklater, a local medium. After hearing our story, she promised to escort us back to the mansion. The state of that damned building when we met up with the sweet old woman was disturbing. Claw marks down the hallways, paint scratched off the wooden doors, every single door busted open, and the lamb blaring through my laptop speakers. Its haunting reversed song slinking down the mansion corridors. It goes without saying what the source of the haunting was, and the medium left with the lamb securely tucked in her bag. I don't know if she still has that cursed disc with her all these years later, or if it made its way into someone else's life. I can only thank her for removing it from ours. But on that day, Veronica and I both learned that Disc's true intention. Jacob's car was parked in the driveway, but he was nowhere to be seen. To this day, he remains a missing person, a sacrificial lamb. Veronica and I paid for our lives with his. Regret is an unbearable thing, a torture no one should be burdened with. Its crushing weight is only staved off by the hopes that he is somewhere better with our Father, whoever owns that disc now. Do not play it. The roadside bar was a dimly lit refuge, its neon sign sputtering like a dying heartbeat against the inky darkness. Sophie sat hunched over a chipped glass of cheap whiskey, her fingers idly tracing the rim as she tried to drown the ache of yet another failed relationship. The jukebox in the corner warbled a melancholy tune, its notes lingering like the ghosts of broken promises. The air was thick with the sour tang of stale beer, mixed with the faint, acrid scent of cigarette smoke that clung to the walls. The place was nearly empty, save for a weary trucker, hunched over a mug of coffee in the far corner, and a bored bartender lazily wiping glasses, with a rag that seemed to spread grime, more than clean. Faded posters of long-forgotten bands adorned the walls, their edges curling and yellowed with age. A lopsided pool table sat near the back, its once vibrant green felt now torn and stained, while an ancient ceiling fan churned sluggishly overhead, barely stirring the stifling, muggy air. The bar seemed alive with a quiet, ghostly energy, as if it had absorbed the sorrows of every shattered soul who'd sought solace within its walls. The chime of the entrance bell broke the stillness as two teenagers strolled in, their laughter cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a blade. Their eyes quickly fell on Sophie, her oversized luggage beside her, and her drink clutched like a lifeline. They exchanged a look before approaching her with an air of casual confidence. "Hey there, sweetie," the taller one said, his smile just shy of charming. "What sets a pretty woman like you doing here, all alone? Not exactly the safest spot, you know." Sophie glanced up, her tired eyes narrowing as they settled on the grinning faces before her. She let out a resigned sigh. "Can sit a woman have a drink in peace without being bothered?" "Easy now," the taller one replied, raising his hands in mock surrender, though his smirk didn't falter. "Just trying to be friendly. That's it's all. No need to bite my head off. Besides, you already look miserable enough without my help." The taller teen chuckled, sliding onto the stool beside Sophie. His companion lingered behind, casually leaning against the bar, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. "Don't mind him," the second one said, his tone smoother, quieter. "He's got a bad habit of sticking his nose where it doesn't belong. You just look like you could use some company. That's all." Sophie took a slow sip from her whiskey, her eyes fixed on the amber liquid swirling in her glass. "Maybe I could," she admitted, her voice flat, "but I sit not in the mood for small talk." "Oh, we're not exactly small talk types," the taller one quipped, his grin spreading. "How about big talk? Got any big dreams, big regrets, big plans?" His laughter was light-hearted, but there was a sharpness to it that made Sophie's grip on her glass tighten. The bartender approached, breaking the tension as he slid another drink toward the teens. They raised their bottles in a mock toast. "To unexpected encounters," the shorter one said, winking at Sophie before taking a long swig. Sophie forced a polite smile but kept her eyes on the bar, her instincts prickling with unease. "What about you, sweetheart?" the taller one pressed. "Where are you headed with all that luggage? Running away or running too?" His tone was teasing, but there was something in the way he watched her, like he was trying to read her mind. Sophie swirled the whiskey in her glass before finally breaking the awkward silence. "I'm heading to visit my sister," she said, her voice carrying a hint of wariness. "She lives out near Little Rock, just off the I-40. The taller teen perked up, his grin widening. "No way, we headed in that direction too. We could totally give you a lift." Sophie hesitated, feeling their gazes linger on her a little too long. "I don't know, I wasn't planning on hitchhiking," she said, her fingers tightening around the glass. "Sister mine, it'll be fun." The shorter one chimed in, his tone light, but insistent. "The roads can be rough out there, and it sits better than going alone, right? Plus, we've got snacks and beer." Something in their eagerness made Sophie's stomach twist, but the thought of saving time and avoiding another long night in a dingy motel was tempting. She glanced down at her oversized luggage and sighed. "Maybe," she said, reluctant. "I'll think about it." They started chatting, the taller teen doing most of the talking, while his quieter friend chimed in with the occasional smirk or nod. Sophie found herself half listening, her thoughts drifting back to the reasons she was on the road in the first place. The past few months had been a whirlwind of pain, a nasty breakup that left her questioning everything, followed by her father's sudden passing, which had shattered what little stability she had left. A little fun wouldn't hurt, she thought. Finishing her drink in one last defiant gulp, the whiskey burned her throat. But it was a welcome distraction from the ache in her chest. She stood up, feeling a slight wooziness creep in, and announced, "All right, boys, I'll go with you, just don't try anything funny." The taller teen grinned, his enthusiasm almost too eager. "You won't regret it," he said, grabbing her luggage before she could protest. His friend gave her a lopsided smile, holding the door open as they stepped into the cool night air. The van was parked under a flickering streetlight, its paint peeling and rust creeping along the edges. Sophie hesitated for a moment, the twisting feeling in her gut growing stronger as she approached. The stench hit her as soon as the door slid open, a pungent mix of stale beer, sweat, and something sour she couldn't quite place. "Hop in," the taller one said, patting the passenger seat. Sophie climbed in reluctantly, her instinct screaming at her to turn back, but she silenced the voice in her head, convincing herself that she was overthinking. After all, what was the worst that could happen? The van rattled to life as the taller teen took the wheel, cranking up the volume on the radio. A cacophony of distorted rock music filled the small space, doing little to ease Sophie's growing discomfort. She clutched her bag tightly, her gaze shifting between the blur of trees passing by the window and the two boys exchanging glances. "So, what's your sister like?" the taller one asked, his tone overly casual as he swerved onto the highway. "She's nice," Sophie replied, hesitant. "Quiet, works as a nurse. You know, the responsible type." Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her jacket as she tried to keep the conversation light. "Well, she sits lucky to have you coming all this way," the shorter one chimed in, his smile sharp. "Family sits important, you know." Sophie nodded but stayed quiet, her unease deepening with each mile. The boys' laughter grew louder, their comments more cryptic. "You must really trust us to hop in a stranger set's van," the taller one said suddenly, his grin widening as he glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Not everyone would do that." Sophie forced a laugh, her pulse quickening. "Well, you seem harmless enough," she said, trying to mask the edge in her voice. The shorter teen let out a low chuckle, leaning back in his seat. "Oh, we're harmless," he said, his tone dripping with something Sophie couldn't quite place. The van jolted as it veered onto a narrow, unpaved road. Sophie's knuckles turned white as she gripped the armrest. "Why are we leaving the highway?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Shortcut," the taller one said breezily. "Relax. We sit'll get you there in no time." But Sophie didn't relax. The twisting feeling in her stomach was back, stronger than ever. The forest around them seemed to close in, the trees casting long skeletal shadows that danced in the van's dim headlights. The music cut out abruptly, leaving only the sound of the tires crunching over gravel, and Sophie's own uneven breathing. The van jolted as it hit a pothole, and Sophie clutched the armrest, her unease growing with every passing mile. The taller teen hummed along to the radio, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel, while the shorter one rummaged through a cooler wedged between the seats. "Thirsty?" the shorter teen asked, pulling out a can of beer and holding it out to Sophie with a grin. It's cold. Might help you relax a bit." Sophie hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to decline. But the weight of the past few months pressed down on her, and she found herself reaching for the can. "Thanks," she muttered, popping it open. The sharp hiss of carbonation filled the van. She took a sip, the bitter taste washing over her tongue. The shorter teen watched her closely, his grin never faltering. "We're not so bad," he said, leaning back in his seat. Sophie forced a smile, though the twisting feeling in her stomach hadn't subsided. She took another sip, then another, hoping the alcohol would dull her unease, but instead, a strange heaviness began to settle over her. Her vision blurred, and her limbs felt like lead. "Hey," she murmured, her voice slurring as she tried to sit up straighter. What fits in this?" The taller teen glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his grin widening. "Just a little something to help you relax," he said, his tone dripping with mock innocence. Panic surged through Sophie, but her body refused to cooperate. The world around her tilted, the edges of her vision darkening. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the shorter teen's smirk, his eyes glinting with something far more sinister than she'd imagined. When she regained consciousness, the world swam into focus, a distorted, fragmented view of the eerie, dark forest surrounding her. The moon hung low in the sky, its pale light barely piercing through the heavy clouds that loomed like a suffocating shroud. Shadows stretched and twisted, the skeletal trees appearing like ghostly sentinels against the dim glow. The rough scrape of dirt against her back sent a jolt of awareness through her, but her body refused to obey her commands. Her muscles were slack, her limbs unresponsive, as if her very essence had been drained. She tried to speak, to cry out, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep within her, reduced to little more than a ragged breath. Her kidnappers loomed above her, their faces hidden in darkness. The faint moonlight cast their outlines in sharp relief, turning them into haunting silhouettes. The taller figure held her by the arms, dragging her with an almost casual indifference, while the shorter one walked ahead, muttering under his breath. Their voices blurred, disjointed fragments of conversation that sent shivers down her spine. Sophie's pulse quickened, a silent scream echoing in her mind as panic surged through her. She fought against the fog, clouding her senses, desperately willing her body to move, to resist, but the dead weight of her limbs betrayed her, leaving her helpless as the forest seemed to close in, its oppressive silence broken only by the crunch of dirt beneath her captor's boots. Sophie's dragged body came to an abrupt halt as her captors reached a clearing. Through her blurred vision, she could make out the dark silhouette of a building, a small, decrepit cabin shrouded in shadow. The structure leaned precariously to one side, its warped wooden planks riddled with cracks and gaps that allowed the moonlight to filter through in ghostly slivers. Vines coiled around the edges like skeletal fingers, gripping the walls as if trying to drag the cabin back into the earth. The taller captor adjusted his grip on her arms, nodding toward the cabin sit's door. "In there," he muttered, his voice low. The shorter one hesitated, glancing warily at the structure. "Do we really have to? This place gives me the creeps." "Shut it." The taller one snapped. "No one sit's gonna find her out here." The door creaked loudly as they pushed it open, revealing an interior that was somehow darker and more oppressive than the forest outside. Sophie was hauled inside, her head lolling to the side, as her vision adjusted to the dim, musty surroundings. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, and the floorboards groaned under their weight. The faint glow of the moon seeped through the cracks in the walls, casting jagged patterns across the cabin's interior. Strange symbols were carved into the wooden beams, their edges rough and uneven, as if they'd been etched in haste. A broken table lay overturned in the corner, surrounded by debris that crunched underfoot as the captors moved. The taller man dropped Sophie unceremoniously onto the cabin floor, her body limp and unresponsive. "Watch her," he barked, already moving toward the door, his thumb grabbing the rest of the stuff from the van. The shorter man snorted, crouching down beside Sophie. His breath was hot and sour as he leaned closer, sneering, "Don't go anywhere now." With a quiet chuckle, Sophie's body remained motionless, but her mind was racing. The fog from the drug was starting to lift, a tingling sensation returning to her fingers. Panic swirled in her chest, but she forced herself to stay still, buying time. The door slammed shut as the taller man left, the sound echoing through the small, oppressive space. The shorter man stood and stretched with a groan, his movements restless. "Creepy place," he muttered to himself, glancing uneasily at the strange symbols carved into the walls. Then it happened. A low crackle outside, like dry leaves crushed beneath a deliberate footstep. The shorter man froze, his head whipped toward the boarded-up window, his eyes wide. "Hey!" he called out, his voice sharper now. "That you?" Silence answered him. He swallowed hard and stepped toward the door, peering through the warped slats. "Come on, man, don't mess with me." Another sound. A rustling closer this time, low and steady. The man's breathing quickened, his bravado slipping. "Stop playing games," he shouted, his voice rising. The forest outside seemed to press in against the cabin, the darkness growing thicker, heavier. Sophie Sipp's pulse hammered in her ears as she lay motionless on the floor, her senses sharpening. She tried to tilt her head just enough to glimpse the shorter man, who was now fumbling with the door latch. "I swear," he muttered, his voice trembling, "if you set trying to scare me." Another crunch, impossibly close this time. Just outside the cabin's door, the shorter man took a cautious step back, his bravado gone. For a moment it was silent again, eerily, impossibly silent. Then, the doorknob rattled. The shorter man's hand trembled as he pulled a revolver from his waistband, the metal glinting faintly in the fractured moonlight. "Who's out there?" he barked, his voice cracking as he aimed the weapon toward the door. The forest outside fell silent, the oppressive stillness pressing against the cabin walls like a living thing. For a moment, nothing moved. Then, the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, retreated into the darkness. The man gulped audibly, his knuckles white as he gripped the revolver. "Coward," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. He glanced back at Sophie, still sprawled on the floor before steeling himself. "Stay put," he growled, though it was unclear whether he was speaking to her or himself. With quaking hands, he unlatched the door and stepped outside, the creak of the hinges echoing into the night. The forest swallowed him whole, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows. Sophie lay frozen, her heart pounding as she strained to hear. The minutes dragged on, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, it came, a blood-curdling scream that tore through the stillness, raw and primal. It was followed by the sharp crack of gunfire, the sound reverberating through the trees. Sophie's breath hitched, her body jolting as adrenaline surged through her veins. The fog clouding her mind lifted in an instant, and she scrambled to her feet, her movements frantic and unsteady. She stumbled toward the door, slamming it shut with all her strength. The old wood groaned under the force, and she fumbled with the lock, her fingers trembling. The cabin seemed to close in around her, the air thick with the weight of impending doom. Outside, the forest was silent once more, but Sophie knew whatever had taken the man was still out there, and now it was coming for her. The silence outside stretched thin, every creak of the cabin walls amplified in Sophie's ears. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she pressed her back against the door, straining to hear any movement beyond it. Then came the knock, soft, measured, almost polite. Sophie froze, her heart pounding in her chest. A man's voice followed, calm and steady. It's okay," he said, his tone gentle, almost reassuring. "You stood safe now. The men are gone. I took care of them." The words hung in the air, dripping with an unnatural calm that sent shivers down Sophie's spine. She didn't answer, didn't dare move. Her fingers tightened around a splintered piece of wood she'd picked up from the debris. "It's all right," the voice continued, more insistent now. The doorknob rattled violently, sending tremors through the fragile wood. "You can open the door. Is Edstam here to help?" Sophie Sepp's instincts screamed at her to stay silent, to stay hidden. She shook her head, whispering to herself, No. The man Sepp's tone changed, a sharp edge creeping into his words. "Come on," he said, his voice louder, impatient. "Open the door." When she didn't respond, the door shuddered under a sudden forceful kick. Sophie cried out, scrambling back as the door creaked on its hinges. "I said, open it," the man roared, the calm facade replaced by anger. Adrenaline surged through Sophie's veins. She scrambled to her feet, her body moving on pure instinct. Grabbing the remnants of the broken bed frame, she shoved the jagged pieces against the door, wedging them between the floorboards and the handle. The door rattled again, the force behind it growing stronger, but the makeshift barricade held. Sophie backed away, her eyes darting wildly around the cabin for anything else she could use to defend herself. The pounding continued, each kick reverberating through the small space. But Sophie didn't let herself give in to the fear. Not this time. The pounding on the door grew louder, each strike sending splinters flying from the fragile wood. Sophie pressed her back against the barricade, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Sophie," the man's voice called, soft and coaxing. "I know you're in there. Open the door, and I'll keep you safe." Her name on his lips sent a chill down her spine. She shook her head, clutching the splintered piece of wood tighter. "No," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "No, no, no." As the door shuddered under another violent kick, her eyes darted around the cabin, searching for something, anything that could help her. That's when she saw them. The carvings on the walls, faintly illuminated by the moonlight seeping through the cracks, seemed to shift and twist before her eyes. She squinted, her heart skipping a beat as the shapes came into focus. It was her. The carvings depicted her life in haunting detail. Her childhood home, the faces of people she'd loved and lost, even the bar where she'd been just hours ago. Her breath hitched as she stepped closer, her trembling fingers brushing against the rough wood. The final image was of her, here in the cabin, her face frozen in terror. A scream tore from her throat as the door behind her groaned, the hinges threatening to give way. The man-sit's voice grew sharper, more insistent. "Sophie, open the door." Panic surged through her, and she spun around, her eyes locking onto the small, grimy window at the back of the cabin. Without thinking, she bolted toward it, gripping the splintered wood like a lifeline. The door cracked behind her, the sound of splintering wood echoing through the cabin. With a desperate cry, she swung the piece of wood at the window, shattering the glass in a spray of jagged shards. The cold night air rushed in, stinging her face as she hoisted herself up. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she forced herself through the narrow opening, ignoring the sharp edges that tore at her skin. As she hit the ground outside, she didn't stop to catch her breath. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs burning as she sprinted into the forest, the darkness swallowing her whole. Sophie sprinted through the dense woods, her breath ragged and her legs burning with every step. The trees loomed around her, their twisted branches clawing at her clothes as if trying to hold her back. It felt as though the forest itself was alive, its ancient roots and gnarled trunks whispering secrets to one another, relaying her every move to the stranger. The oppressive darkness pressed in on her, the faint glow of the moon barely piercing through the canopy above. Her heart leapt when she spotted the van in a small clearing ahead. Relief surged through her, but it was short-lived. As she drew closer, the scene before her froze her in her tracks. The van's tires were slashed, the rubber shredded and useless. The tall teenager lay sprawled face down in a pool of blood, his lifeless body illuminated by the pale moonlight. Sophie's stomach churned, but she forced herself to look away, her survival instincts kicking in. She turned sharply, veering off the trail and plunging deeper into the forest. Her only hope was to lose her pursuer in the labyrinth of trees. The ground beneath her feet was uneven, littered with roots and fallen branches that threatened to trip her with every step. She pushed forward, her lungs screaming for air, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. Then it happened. Her foot landed on something taut, a tripwire hidden beneath the leaves. Before she could react, the rope snapped tight around her ankle, yanking her off the ground with brutal force. A scream tore from her throat as she was hoisted upside down, the blood rushing to her head. She dangled helplessly, the rope biting into her skin as she twisted and struggled. The forest fell silent again, the only sound her ragged breathing and the creak of the rope swaying in the breeze. Panic surged through her as she clawed at the knot around her ankle, her fingers trembling. She knew she didn't have much time. The stranger was coming. Sophie dangled helplessly, the rope biting into her ankle as she twisted in the air. Her screams echoed through the forest, but the oppressive silence swallowed them whole, leaving her cries unheard. The blood rushed to her head, her vision blurring as she struggled against the knot, her fingers raw and trembling. Then, he appeared. The stranger emerged from the shadows, his movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. His ragged clothes hung from his wiry frame, smeared with dark stains that glistened faintly in the moonlight. His face was a mask of twisted delight, a grotesque smile stretching across his features. In his hand, he held a long, gleaming knife, the blade catching the faint light as he turned it lazily. Sophie sits breath hitched, her screams faltering as terror gripped her. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, no." The man tilted his head, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. "You've got such a lovely voice," he said, his tone soft, almost tender. "It's been listening to it for weeks now. Watching you, waiting for the perfect moment." Her heart pounded in her chest. As his words sank in, he took a step closer, the knife gliding through the air as he gestured with it. "You didn't even notice, did you? How I followed you through the city, through the woods, always just out of sight, always in the shadows." Sophiette's body trembled, her mind racing for a way out, but the rope held her fast. The stranger Sip's smile widened as he raised the blade to his lips, his tongue flicking out to trace its edge. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "you sit mine." His laughter erupted, a chilling sound that echoed through the forest, filling the air with its eerie resonance. Sophie's screams returned, raw and desperate, but the forest remained indifferent, its ancient trees standing as silent witnesses to her plight. I have always prided myself on my ability to separate my emotions from my work. Psychiatry is about detachment, about peeling away the layers of the mind while keeping your own firmly intact. Or at least, that's what I believed. The human psyche is a labyrinth, a delicate web of experiences, traumas, and perceptions that shape identity. As a psychiatrist, my role is to navigate this unreliable maze, untangling the thoughts that ensnare my patients in their own torment. Objectivity is paramount, allowing empathy, but never attachment, understanding, but never absorption. I was trained to recognize patterns, to differentiate between reality and delusion, and to always remain in control. The mind is both fragile and formidable, and in my years of practice, I had come to respect its power. But nothing in my education, professional experience, or in the countless patients I had treated, had prepared me for what was to come. Nothing had warned me that the boundary between sanity and madness was far thinner than I had ever imagined. Gabriel changed all that. He arrived on a grey November morning, brought in by orderlies who refused to meet his gaze. There was something about him, something unnerving, yet familiar. He was calm, too calm for someone committed against their will. As I sat across from him in my office, clipboard in hand, he smiled. Not the nervous, polite smile I was used to. No, this was something else. "You look tired, Doctor," he said, tilting his head. "I imagine it must be exhausting." I ignored the remark. "Gabriel, do you understand why you stand here?" "I do," he said. "But do you?" I let the silence stretch between us. Patients often tested boundaries, trying to dictate the power dynamic. I refused to indulge him. "As Teb reviewed your files," I said, "you believe the staff here are not who they claim to be, that they are patients pretending to be doctors." His smile widened. "That Sip's not quite right." He leaned forward slightly. "I believe everyone here is a patient, including you." I tapped my pen against the clipboard. "And what makes you think that?" He chuckled. "Because it's true." Over the next few days, I evaluated Gabriel as I would any delusional patient. He was articulate, intelligent even, But his fixation on his theories did not waver. Each session, he built his argument, like a master manipulator, laying a trap. "How long have you worked here, doctor?" he asked during our second session. 10 years, I answered without hesitation. "And before that?" I paused. "I interned at several hospitals. But before that?" I frowned. "Medical school, of course." Gabriel nodded, eyes sharp. "You say that with such certainty. But can you remember it? The details? The classrooms, the professors, the smell of formaldehyde in the labs?" "Of course," I said. But the memories, they were fuzzy, vague impressions rather than concrete moments, as though I had rehearsed the answers but never truly lived them. Gabriel leaned back. "Strange, isn't it? Doubt is a parasite. It starts as a whisper in the back of the mind, and before you realize it, it has taken root." I began noticing things. The way the other doctors never spoke about their lives outside the hospital. The way the orderlies watched me, hesitant, as if unsure how to act around me. The way my office felt staged, like a carefully curated set, rather than a lived-in space. I asked my colleague, Dr. Ellis, about it. She laughed and waved me off. "We work in a psychiatric facility, Daniel," she said. "Paranoia is contagious. Dunset, let him get inside your head." But Gabriel was inside my head. One night, I walked the corridors of St. Dimphna's, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. The halls were silent, except for the occasional distant wail from the high-security wing. I approached the records room. I needed proof of my life before this place. I searched for my own file. My hands trembled as I flipped through the cabinets. Nothing. I searched again, more frantically. No records of my employment. No transcripts from medical school. No past. A cold sweat broke over me. The room spun. Then I heard footsteps. Gabriel stood in the doorway, arms crossed. He sighed, almost pitying. "You're starting to see it, aren't you?" he whispered. I staggered back. "This is a trick." "No trick." He stepped closer. "You were my patient, Daniel. You have always been my patient." My vision blurred. My breathing came in ragged gasps. I reached for the wall to steady myself. "No," I croaked. "No. I am Dr. Daniel Carter." Gabriel kneeled beside me. His voice gentle. "That's what they made you believe. It was easier that way. You were once a brilliant psychiatrist, Daniel. But something happened. A break. A fracture. You forgot." My mind rebelled against his words, but something deep inside me knew he was right. They say the mind protects itself from trauma by rewriting reality. I had rewritten my own. Gabriel, Dr. Gabriel Monroe, had been my psychiatrist all along. St. Dimphna's wasn't a hospital where I worked. It was where I was confined. I had been sick. Still was. The staff had played along with my delusion for years, hoping I would come to terms with it on my own, but Gabriel had refused to lie to me. He had given me the truth, and now that I saw it, really saw it, I felt something snap. The man I had been, the doctor I thought I was dead. I collapsed onto the floor, the cold linoleum pressing against my cheek. My mind spiraled into the abyss, grasping at a reality that had never been real. And in the distance, I heard the orderlies calling for restraint. Dr. Monroe whispered one last thing before they dragged me away. "Welcome home, Daniel." I walk my dog in another dimension. Here's what we see. Hello. I am writing this before I head out. Where to? I'm still not sure. See, I like to stick to a routine, but lately, me and my dog have been going on strange walks. Let me tell you about some, please. I need to tell someone. My mom got me my dog Bud as a present to help me out with my mental health. I had been going downhill, and this boxer managed to pull me up from the depths of my feelings and into a period of happiness. I say period because, soon enough, my monsters caught up to me. Anyway, you came to hear about the walks, not my personal problems. So, let's get into it. The first day was pretty normal, maybe too normal. Me and Bud woke up together. He went to grab his leash, and I got dressed to go outside. It looked like a beautiful day outside, so I decided to dress light. Bud got back with his leash. Just as I finished dressing, I got him a treat for being better than usual at our daily routine, and we headed out. It was, in fact, a beautiful day. It was very bright, the sun warm on our skin. All of my neighbors were outside, which was odd, as I lived in a more elderly neighborhood, but there they were, all smiling and waving at each other. It was odd, but who was I to judge people being outside on such a day? As I was walking, everyone turned and waved to me, smiling, almost in synchrony, one after the other. Again, odd, as most of the people around here were codgy, old people, more concerned about catching Judge Judy reruns than tending to their dead grass. I looked down, and I don't know much about gardening, but whatever they used, maybe paint, had sure worked on their grass, as it shined in the sun. I even stopped to talk to some of them, complimenting their green thumb, and they ran inside to get Bud a treat, which they never did, as they were all very transparent about not wanting to live near a dog, even though Bud almost never barked, and I was very good about picking up after him. "Oh, hello," said a neighbor from behind. I turned to find Pauline, the grumpiest shut-in of our neighborhood, now smiling and jogging in place, now bending over to pet Bud, the target of many police calls about noise disturbances. I grit my teeth in an attempt to make friendly conversation. "Hey there, Miss Pauline. You've been gone for a while, haven't you?" Bud whines as he pulls away. Not a surprising reaction when she yells at him almost on the daily. No, I haven't." "Why? Have I been too quiet?" I asked, genuinely confused. She laughed, grabbing my shoulder. "No, you've been gone," she insisted. I started to walk away, saying some sort of goodbye. I heard nothing else from her. Me and Bud arrived home. He went to his bed and almost immediately went to sleep. He has been taking very long naps, almost only waking up for our walks. I collapsed onto the couch, also falling asleep. When I woke up, it was raining, hard. I stared out the window, sitting up, before my eyes drifted to the door. Bud was standing there, staring at me, expectedly, leash in mouth. I groaned, flopping onto my back. Of course he wanted to walk now. I got dressed, and we headed out. Immediately I realized something was wrong. The grass was dead again. And even worse, the houses looked ransacked, boards covering some windows. I turned to my house, but it looked untouched. Bud held his head low but did his business. As we were making our way back, I noticed something, or someone, staring at me through the broken window. A blank, dark figure, too dark for me to make out any of their features. Bud sensed it, and started to bark in the direction I was looking. Me and him ran back to the house, and I slammed the door behind me. Panting, I passed out. I woke up again. I knew I was asleep for a while, but I knew I had to take Bud out. It was funny. My life now revolved around walking a dog. I looked forward to it, usually, but as of late, what with the weird walks, I was now dreading leaving my house. As it turned out, I had good reason to not want to leave the house, as while the clock said that it was around noon, outside of my window said otherwise. It was pitch black, with not even the street lights working. The lights being out was especially odd, because anytime there was something wrong with anything, a neighbor would call the city. I had dismissed the previous walk as a dream. It had to be. It just had to be. I went to wake Bud up, and he only woke when he heard me get his leash. As we walked, Bud had an air of hesitation about him. I would soon find out why. There was a car that would pass us every 5 minutes or so. At first I thought that it was a different car, and paid it no mind. But by the third time it passed, I had noticed some similarities, and by the fifth, I knew we were being followed. I turned me and Bud around, and on the opposite side of the street, a dark figure emerged from the only working streetlight. The figure was like a walking silhouette, no features, and was as dark as the night sky. Just as we finished passing him, I heard the stranger break out into a run, and Bud turned around to bark at him. I only turned around when Bud stopped barking, thinking he recognized the figure as a neighbor, but when I turned to see, the thing was gone, disappeared into the surrounding dark. I woke up at home, with Bud in front of me, leash in mouth, tail ever so still. I was slumped against the island in the kitchen. I knew what to do. It was odd though. He always seemed to want to go for a walk, but now, it was almost like he felt the same as me, like we had to keep walking, like it was a duty rather than a convenience of not having to clean up. I wanted a break. I wanted a rest. I would rather clean up a mess than step outside. I don't know what I'll find. I don't know what will find me. I'm so scared. I'm going to try to not take him for a walk for a little bit. I didn't last too long before anxiety consumed me. I had to walk my dog. As we walked, I didn't recognize anything out of the ordinary, except that I was lost in thought more so than usual. It was like nothing existed. Nothing except for me. Walking Bud was fun. At first, I enjoyed getting outside, getting exercise. I'm not sure when that changed for me, but then it seemed that I was back in the space I was before I got Bud. Walking him became a chore. I woke up. We walked before I go to bed. We walked before I showered. We walked every 3 nice 4 hours. We walked. It became an anxious hell. I still loved Bud, of course, more than life, but the walls were draining me. I must have gone on thinking like this for hours, before I realized that I hadn't moved from my spot on the floor. I had imagined that whole walk. Bud was still in front of me, leash in mouth. Sorry, buddy, but I need to go back to sleep. I woke up in my bed. The sun was out. Yay, I figured that I might as well take a walk with Bud, even if he had gone to the bathroom in the house. I should probably check. Try as I might. I couldn't find Bud anywhere. I called for him, looked for him, but he wasn't there. Even worse, the whole time I was looking, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. It sounded like it was ringing multiple times at once. I checked the voicemail. Turns out I had 42 missed calls, all from my family. Had I really been asleep that long? I decided to start going through them, as it wasn't totally unusual for Bird to play games like this with me. I think he knows how much it bothers me. The bastard. He's such a good boy. The first call was from my mom. She sounded worried. Hi, sweetie. Give me a call. Hey there. Give me a call. Elliot. Really? Call me. Now. Sweetheart. I'm getting very worried. I'm coming over. Weird. I wonder what's wrong. I should walk Bud. I need some sleep. We went for our walk. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. The sky was cloudy. There were sirens in the distance. Not odd for around this neighborhood. We got back from our walk, and I still hadn't found Bud. What was I walking? This thing that looks at, even as I'm writing this, can't be Bud. It doesn't look real. I want to leave now. I can't do this. Where is my dog? I just want my dog. I love him, and I want to go for a normal walk with my normal dog. I lied. I love our walks. We have some good ones. He's a good boy. Really. He didn't mean anything. Please don't do that. I find myself sobbing as I hear what sounds like someone trying to break down the door. They say they are the police. They say they are with my mom. But I don't believe them. They just want to take Bud away. Those neighbors probably called again. I know he barks sometimes, but he's a dog. He's supposed to do that. And then there's the person on my couch. They look just like me, but they aren't me. They can't be, right? I have to move from this spot. Something is dripping from the ceiling and it's getting on my computer. I'll have to have him clean it up when he wakes up. We all need our rest. They finally managed to break through the door. My mom comes running in. Maybe she can explain all of this. She's always right. After all, she comes running right by me, and towards the person on the couch though. Weird. I'm her son. Not this guy. Wait. Why doesn't he have his head on? Where's Bud? I need my dog. It's dark out now. The police had to remove my mom, which she made pretty hard. I don't blame her. I haven't moved myself. Not off of that couch. Anyways, Bud stayed with me to the very end. And now, I think I'll take him for my final walk. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Bud. Sincerely, Elliot. This is not only your usual story about the person who put themselves in trouble because they were too curious. I tried to put an end to something I considered to be the height of unfairness. My real name cannot be mentioned, but for the sake of the story you can call me Cherry. I used to work for this big brand that I cannot name as well because of the lawsuits, and maybe worse, that has a hand in several and so different sectors that it seems they want to do everything. They have a branch in my country, and I had obtained a job in administration in 2012. Not the fanciest job despite the size of the company and the reputation of the brand, but hey, at least it was a decent income. After around 2 weeks of work only, the rumors and other inside concerning the company reached my very big ears, and I made sure to get all of them. You see, the job was quite demanding. Monday to Saturday, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., with one pause from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Not to mention the frequent and unofficially mandatory overtimes from 7:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. During each day, there was a supervisor different for each day, and nicknamed after that day, that oversaw everything. They were said to do exactly the same jobs as the rest of us in the administration department, but during the night shifts from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. to this very day, I believe that all of the regular employees only know them by Monday, all the way to the last one, Saturday. So, those guys worked for 5 hours only in an entire day, except for the specific day they had to supervise us, and I learned that they were paid crazy money while doing so less hours. After some time, the crazy money part turned out to be very real, and was pretty easy to verify, not from an administration file, since almost everything about them was so secretive, but by just looking at what they parked as they showed up for work. Exotic, expensive machines that looked more like spaceships rather than cars. After 4 months of hard work, I really started to have a real problem with my remuneration and my input compared to theirs. I started communicating with the faceless, voiceless, and always absent manager that we can call Mrs. Vittinson, always via email. I inquired about the requirements to be promoted, if I can call it like that, and join the night shift crew. She told me that one space had to be freed for me to then occupy it. It was crushing but pretty logical. I also learnt through her response that it was not only our department that had a night shift counterpart. However, as soon as the night shift crew in administration learned about my interest to join their ranks, their behavior towards me changed, for the worst. Speaking of worst, that is exactly what Monday was. He made a personal mission of his to torment me with work and pressure, as if he wanted me to give up and resign altogether, but I considered myself a tough woman, and resisted. Tuesday was different, but he had that look towards me. You know, the persistent one that just says I'm watching you, and that just makes you feel really uncomfortable. Wednesday enjoyed toying with me, giving me tasks that did not make any sense at all, and that I suspect to be irrelevant for the job and the company. She also liked to order me around and treat me like her personal slave, with that smirk of her that I always dreamt of headbutting off her face. Thursday also liked toying with me, but in a very different manner, asking me strange and cryptic questions such as, do you know the meaning of life? What's the most important thing to you? What's the worst decision you ever took in your life? Really weird stuff given the context. She also had that drained, tired and sad look on her face all the time for whatever reason. Maybe she was not really up to the task. I also remember her for the elegant scent of her perfume. Friday was the mystery and the inspiration fueling the craziest rumors. That supervisor had a black metallic helmet constantly on the head like a medieval knight, and wore a long and fancy black coat that covered their feet and all their features as well, making it impossible to determine if they were a man or a woman. Friday was the only one whose car I never saw, and would just like pop up in the office somehow, as if they were already there all along. The mysterious supervisor would not speak a word, and only communicate with writings or signs. Just like Tuesday, Friday liked to stare at me, which is worse when you cannot even see the facial expressions and have a clue about the intentions. I always wondered why that company chose to employ a strange character who could not at all interact with clients and visitors. Saturday was the chill girl, except towards me of course, and would often let everyone go home early, but not me. There was also that strange rule that we had to vacate the building very quickly at 11 p.m. and never show up during midnight, and the night shift. You might understand why later. When I completed 1 year and 7 months of good services, the opportunity to upgrade finally presented itself. Thursday stopped showing up for work without any explanation provided, and we had to be off during that specific day, each week until they find a replacement. Sure enough, I thought that I would be soon chosen for the position, but instead, they posted a job advertisement. I was stunned, but kept pushing by applying. I was about to get that salary raise and be referred to as Thursday. The application process was strange to say the least, and almost comical in some way. If you were to see that ad, you would think it was either a joke or some obvious scam maybe, but certainly nothing serious at all. It contained questions such as, how many rats have you killed in the last 6 months? How do you handle pests, and how do you treat flies? What color do you intend to paint your safe room next time? I mean, were they serious? Such a big brand, big company doing that. I did not remember the job advert for my position and my hiring process being so peculiar. I contacted the manager once again to inquire about the requirements for the night shift role. And that time, she decided to just completely shut me down by saying that I was not qualified. I was enraged. I knew I could do better than the previous Thursday, and also, I was convinced that the job was my ticket to early retirement. I made a first plan to uncover the truth, and shared it with a few people that did not appreciate the unfairness. Among them was Yelvina from the customer service department, who I believe has very interesting stories about the company for you guys. She might post one day. What was the result of discussing my plans? Well, when the newly appointed Thursday arrived for his first day of work, he approached me and said with his very soothing voice, "Message from the higher-ups. Stop your shenanigans or there will be consequences." Like I said to you earlier, I considered myself a tough woman. I did not listen, of course. At first I was convinced that one of my colleagues ratted to be kept in the higher-ups. Good books. Maybe because they were eyeing the same position as me, especially Green Snake Darlin. That position belonged to me no matter what. Or so I thought at the time, not to some outsider we did not even know. Therefore I decided to act alone. After all, I was a tough woman, capable of everything, and by myself. I began taking solo trips in parts of the building that did not have anything to do with my department, and that was when I discovered the black metallic door. It immediately reminded me of Friday, and the moment I wanted to touch it for closer inspection, the supervisor of that day, Tuesday, caught me in the act, and forbade me to ever approach that door. I would hide after hours in the surroundings of the building, just watching what unfolded outside during the nights. At 11 p.m., after literally kicking everyone out of the building, including the supervisor of the day, only the security agent, the only one by the way for such an immense facility, would be left inside, and he would lock the main entrance at exactly 11:55 p.m. The supervisor of the day would then just go and come back later, at 1 a.m., or hang around outside, until their peers' arrival in their flashy supercars, except for Friday, who would just be seen walking to the premises almost out of the blue. There were also a few people I was not familiar with, from other departments, which were customer service, marketing, information technology, research and human resources. What kind of HR work anyone has to do from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. All of them would then wait for the security guard to open the door at 1 a.m. to let them in, only to rush out of the building again at 6 a.m. The cleaners crew arrives in their own van at 4 a.m., and they all stay holed up in their vehicle. At 6 a.m., since they have one of those special inside parking places like the manager, they just start the van and disappear inside the building. I have never seen what they look like. Very bizarre stuff, right? But nothing would stop me from uncovering the truth. even if they told me that death awaited in my workplace. I spent months just watching and monitoring when I could. In 2014 I finally had enough, and could not take it anymore. I had to know. According to my observations, Saturday, the day itself, and not the supervisor, often came with some laziness and loopholes that I could exploit. That Saturday, I hoped for Saturday the supervisor to let me off the hook, and she did. No overtime that day. However, I exited the building after my shift, changed in my car, waited for the coast to be clear enough, then returned inside the facility, masked, unnoticed, and hid in the restrooms. At around 10:50 p.m., I heard someone enter the restroom I was hiding in. At first, I did not think much of it, and just ensured to remain still and quiet, waiting for the person to do their business until they go away. However, I soon realized that whoever it was had a very specific assignment to perform in that particular place. First, the person switched off the lights and plunged us in darkness. I wish I could use my phone to record whatever was going on, but that would have certainly given me away, so I just listened carefully. Then, I heard the sounds of scratching against a wall, as if a sharp object was being used on it. Finally, there was a vivid red light that illuminated the room for about 5 seconds before it abruptly vanished. As soon as the mysterious person left the restroom, the lights came back on. At around 11:43 p.m., I came out to investigate. There was no sign of anything particular on the walls, and I scratched my head trying to make sense of the red light. I ended up just taking random pictures of the walls, hopeful that something would come out of it. I stepped out in the hallway at 11:55 p.m., intending to take advantage of the security guard being busy locking the main entrance. I made my way to Mrs. Vittenson's office and successfully broke in, resolute to fish for any information. Whoever you are reading this, I would be lying to you if I say that I did not get distracted as soon as I was in. You should see the furniture, the designs, the gold and the space. I would not have minded to live in that office and pay rent, but could I even afford it? I started looking into some paperwork as quietly as possible, hoping she did not have some fancy camera or alert system hidden somewhere. She actually had worse than that. I ended up finding printed versions of my CV and cover letter, clipped together in a dark grey file, which cover had a big red stamp on it, consisting of one word: blind. The discovery rendered me perplexed, as I could not interpret what that meant. Also, who put that in her office, since she was seemingly never present there on any day? Did she also work during the night? The moment I tried to take pictures of my files, I heard a group of people approaching. It sounded like soldiers' boots as the army men jogged towards the manager's office. To capture me, I ducked behind the desk, still looking at the entrance, and listened carefully with terror when the jogging came to an abrupt stop right behind the door. The lock had been broken by myself, so I knew that there was nothing left to prevent any entry. The moment I saw the doorknob turn, I completely crawled under the desk, hoping for a miracle. I then heard whoever those people were come in. However, it sounded really wrong. It was as if they just poured inside the office for lack of a better explanation, as if they were no longer using their feet, but were rather all rolling on the floor, and making those disturbing and incomprehensible whispers as they moved around, searching for me. From the yellow light and the rusty sounds it made, I could tell that one of them held an old lantern. Out of the blue, a notification then popped up on my phone. You know the one, the very annoying one that lets you know that, hey, there is Wi-Fi here. You can connect, if you want. I wonder what Wi-Fi that was, because I was sure to already be connected to the company's. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Phone. I thought for trying to connect me to unemployment, or worse. The problem was that even being in vibration mode did not ensure total discretion, so the sound made them stop every movement and whispers, in further suspicion of an intruder. After a few seconds they moved again, and I heard several hands carefully land on the desk, as if they were being cautious not to put too much weight on the expensive furniture and preventing it from breaking. I then saw very pale fingers, coming from numerous hands, appear on the edge of the desk. But something was wrong about their positioning. There were too many hands close to each other, and the fingernails were completely black and ominously razor sharp. I then saw different kinds of hair appear at the edge of the desk, and slowly coming down, as if different heads and therefore pairs of eyes were about to peek at me upside down. I shivered in terror, and probably gave away my location as my trembling made me hit different parts of the desk involuntarily. I do not know what to call it. Instinct, intuition maybe, but something just told me to close my eyes, because if I looked at those faces, my eyes closed. I then saw the blackness suddenly getting warm as they shone the lantern's light on my face. The familiar scent of Thursday's perfume hit my nostrils, almost tempting me to open my eyes. I just opted to keep my eyes closed and to remain as still as possible. They had caught me. My ordeal did not stop there. I felt several cold fingers land on my ski mask in curiosity and examination. I remained still. Suddenly, a whistle resounded from far in the hallway, and they all started whispering again as they rushed outside, fortunately abandoning me in favor of whatever was priority outside there. I then gasped and opened my eyes, as if I was underwater for too long, regaining my breath and composure. The investigation was immediately called off. I had to leave. I stepped out of the hallway, hoping to avoid any round two with them, and was taking random turns, until I suddenly got grabbed, pulled in a corner, and a firm hand was placed on my mouth, before I could let out a scream. "If you want to live, come with me. No noise, no talking, no looking back," a man said. He then pushed me in front of him, holding my head forward, and leading me to an unknown destination. At some point the army jogging, and the rolling on the floor sound started again, that time in a very disorderly and rushed way. The whispers were replaced by loud and angry gibberish that were getting closer to us from behind. Along with the yellow light of the lantern, we rushed towards an open door. I recognized it to be the black door Tuesday forbade me from approaching one day, and we stormed inside the room before the man locked it behind him. I turned around in reflex to see that it was the security guard, and in response, after locking the entrance, he pushed me into a cupboard that he also locked. Meanwhile, the strange people were banging on the room entrance door, and suddenly went from rage to courtesy as the pounding switched to gentle knocks. Security. A soft woman's voice could be heard behind the door. "There's a blind rat in the facility," she added. "I want it." The voice then yelled, turning into a loud male growling voice, rattling the door. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered on the verge of tears as the night was turning into an absolute nightmare. "Shut the fuck up," the security guard retorted, whispering, still right behind the cupboard door. The rage and the banging then resumed. I checked the network reception on my phone, intending to call the police before we both die, but it was impossible. When the time reached 1 a.m., the nightmare stopped, so suddenly that it felt like an off button was pressed, and that was it. The security guard left me inside the cupboard despite my protest, and rushed to the main entrance to open the door for the night shift crew, I suppose. He then returned minutes later, and I heard him casually sit on a chair and sighing in relief. Hey, let me out," I shouted, banging on the cupboard door. "Don't worry. You'll be out of here, and out of job, at 6 in the morning. I've already reported your dumbass to the others," he replied.
"What? Why? Why did you do that? You just saved me from... I don't know what to just throw me under the bus? And what was that?"
I spoke. "Saving you? You broke into the manager's office at midnight while I'm on watch. I wasn't saving you. I was saving my job, and who knows how many pieces of you the cleaners would have to pick up. I don't want to have to report to those guys. I don't want to see those guys ever again. Never," he responded. 7. The night shift security guard kept me there just as he said, and refused to answer any of my questions. At 5:55 a.m., he went out and came back at 6:03 a.m. to free me. That was the moment I saw his badge and his name, and especially the inside of that room. Everything in that room was either manufactured black or intentionally painted black afterwards, making the dim light inside almost useless. Strange things upon strange things. The moment I was out and escorted by Sven, We met a boy of approximately 11 years old waiting for us at the entrance of the building. He was smartly dressed and had some mischievous and vicious smiles stuck on his delicate face. The kid explained to me why they had to keep my phone and how they would not attempt anything against me as long as I keep my mouth shut about the company and its staff. He then assured me that my last salary would be paid in full and fired me on the spot.
What?
But I swear I didn't see anything, and I'll not say any. I tried pleading. Oh, you sure didn't see enough? The kid retorted, if you did, you wouldn't be alive and well to tell. Goodbye, Cherry. Thank you for your services, he added. No, you can't. And who are you? You're just a kid. What you doing here? I questioned. A kid? To your blind eyes, maybe. I'm one of the supervisors. You can call me Sunday, he said. Out. Now. Unable to argue further, I stepped out not only of the building and the job, but out of the corporate world. My mind showered with much more questions than before my little investigation. The rest of the night shift crews from all the departments was waiting outside to see me go, and Wednesday seized the opportunity to mockingly wave me goodbye. I apologize for not being able to provide you with answers that you probably wish you had concerning my story. And this company, I tried to uncover the truth, and failed. I ended up opening my own business in 2018. It is not to be compared to that big brand. But at least I can handle a few things on my terms, while counting on a few other people of trust, instead of leaving a very important part of my life at the mercy of those shady people, whoever or whatever they are. God. The procedure was to make him immortal. His cells are no longer capable of being damaged, not permanently. Oliver looked up at his body, seeing the holes close up on their own. He started walking past me, and the guards began gunning him down again. I had to move out of the way. A bullet grazed me, but I was fine. Oliver took their guns, and in an instant I couldn't hear their voices anymore. I looked up to him to see that he had murdered both of them in a single motion. Everything afterwards happened so fast. He ran out of the building, and I assumed he escaped, because not one of the corpses we found was his. As of October 20th, 2018, the program was shut down. We were let go. What remained of the staff? But I do believe we are being watched, ready to be taken out if needed. I'm writing this in case you read this, Oliver. Whatever you've become, don't let them find you. I'm not sure who you can trust today, but you have a gift. It'd be wise to let people know about it. I'm not sure who though. I'm sorry. I believe they've caught on to what I'm doing, so I believe this is all I can say. I might die tonight. Who knows? I've done my part for the world. Subject 009. Enter the room and sit on the couch. A man in his early 30s entered the room. He looked around a bit nervously and saw the couch. He sat down and started rubbing his arm. I opened my phone. 15:01. I set it down with a countdown of 1 hour. I then nodded to my coworker to start. He nodded back and looked at the console, flipping a switch. I grabbed the microphone. It was the 8th person this had happened to. I'm not sure why we're still doing this, but whatever. I spoke to the man. Subject 009. Do not scratch the itch. He looked around for the voice, confused. He called out, What? What? Itch I don't it have a... He looked down at his arm and started scratching. I spoke out to him again, louder and more tense. Do not scratch the itch. 009. I looked down at my phone. 15:03. He put his arms down looking at it. He felt it. I could too, but I couldn't scratch it. It'll infect me. If I do, it already took him. Maybe he still had a chance. So, I saw him stand up and walk around. He's trying to ignore it. Even he knows that scratching it will only worsen it. It'll only worsen his condition. He was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. His hair had already fallen out, and he agreed to try a new experimental gas that can kill just about anything. All you had to do was not activate it on yourself, as weird as it sounds. All they had to do was survive the itch for an hour. None was successful so far. The highest time someone went was 006, with 43 minutes. He's been walking for about 5 minutes now. He keeps grabbing at it, just tightening his grip against that one spot on his arm. I ask him how he is doing. He responds that he's fine, but even I can see that he won't make it. 15:10. We turned on the television to try and distract him even more. Gave him full access to any channels he wanted. We had to make sure he stayed focused on anything else but his itch. How are you feeling, Oliver? Do you need us to bring you anything to eat? Or, Ice Chew take some spaghetti or something? Why can Nays tie scratch? Why said you have to ask that question? I sighed and opened the mic back up. It's part of the process. Scratching it will make it worse for you. It attacks your cancer by damaging the tumor, and then it attacks the damaged cells of your cancer. But if you create those damaged cells, it won't be able to identify anymore which one is dead and the ones you need, meaning it'll kill you. Slowly, painfully. You have another 47 minutes to go by. We can end the process if you want. But, unfortunately, your cancer will stay. Oh, no, I can keep going. Just spaghetti, please, and maybe some mittens. Something to help me prevent this. You got it. A sealed room on the other side would open as a small remote-controlled table with wheels. Drove over towards him with the items he requested. He put them on, and he sat down, starting to eat his spaghetti. I could see he was still tense about everything. Probably even more now. I only hope this wasn't his last meal. We didn't have the best chefs here. Nothing of this operation was under government surveillance. Everything we did here will have to be destroyed once successful. I have to legally say that these people have signed an understanding that there was a chance that they could die during this treatment. They were aware of the potential consequences that could happen, and still decided to go through. Where they are now is not my say. 15:16. Oliver is still eating his spaghetti and watching TV. He had tried to go itch his arm with the mitten, but was able to hold back. He tried distracting himself even more. It was going well, considering. Oh, can I ask a few questions? Of course, but please remember we can only respond with what we start allowed to say. Oh, how did you know about me? Why me? Why do I get this treatment? What happened to the others? We chose you because we've seen your academic potential. You've worked hard all your life. What you were burdened with isn't fair. You deserve a good life, a long life. You get this treatment because, as desperate as you are, you decided to live, and we only wish to help you with that. This treatment is not approved by the government, but you might be able to make it so. Human trials are needed for this. Animals don't listen, and they'll just scratch. Please, understand you are not a pawn. You are not a guinea pig. You are a person who wants help, and with it might even save the world. I took a deep breath afterwards, and spoke out again, in a more warning tone. The others scratched the itch. Do not scratch the itch, Oliver. I could see his eyes widen a bit. Everything I had just said stuck with him. He felt more important than ever. Maybe that was the push he needed. You'd be surprised at how heavy this toll can be. 5:23. I know what you're wondering. Why don't we just tie them up? Make them unable to move during the procedure. We couldn't contain them after the 38-minute mark. It has been 22 minutes since the gas had entered Oliver's body, and I'll have to tell him soon that he'll feel a lot of pressure to scratch it. Subject 001. Broke his upper torso, dislocated his arms, broke his joints, tore his muscles. Trying to free himself, he bled out. Subject 002. We made sure he couldn't move at all. Passing the 42-minute mark, he bit out his tongue as paramedics tried to contain him. He bled out, scratching the itch. Subject 003. We put a mouth guard and blocked his mouth from closing, giving the same restraints as 002. Died from overforcing himself and his body. He tensed up so hard that his brain vessels rendered him brain dead, soon after killing him, quite literally blowing his fuses. Why are we so weird about how we talk? That's because of our boss. I couldn't tell you anything more other than he specified us to focus on that line. Don't scratch the itch. Maybe it had some powerful mental power. We didn't really get in that situation. Honestly, it made me want to scratch my non-existent itch more. I had been doing this for 4 months now. I could turn it on and off by now. But it was still annoying, like saying the manual breathing. Sorry. Anyway, we had our orders. We had our pay. It was horrible seeing those people die. Don't get me wrong, but this gas was working. I personally looked at the charts of the other people. They were dead, but they no longer had tumors or diseases. The gas worked. Other than the side effects, it was a cure. Maybe in my mind, I was trying to convince myself that this was ethical, since they did sign, knowing what could happen. I suppose they did, because what else could they lose? I'll get back to it now. I pushed up my glasses, put my drink down, and picked up the microphone. 15:29. Oliver, you're soon about to hit a time mark which everything will get even more stressful and tense. We have not tried to do this yet, but we're willing to give you a choice. We can give you some anesthesia to help your body, but that can increase the chance of failure. Or we can let you do your thing and trust you won't scratch it. Oh, what am I going to feel? We SIP noticed an increase of anger in people hitting this time mark. We SIP stay silent until you can tell us that you feel okay. Or, oh hi. Subfear dealt with anger all my life. How hard can this one be? I have my methods. So, you choose nothing? Oh. Can I get some white noises? We can do that for you. He smiled a bit, sitting on the ground as the room started emitting white noise. For the last few people we had done these tests on, I became hopeless, feeling like it was impossible to actually surpass this challenge. But Oliver had fired back a flame of hope inside of me. I remembered the others. I sit. I'm sure you sit are a bit curious. Subject 004. We let her into the room. At that point it was empty. Nothing to distract herself with. It didn't last long. About 12 minutes. She begged us to stop. I wish we could have, but the minute after she was already peeling the damn skin off of her body. We had to close the room for 2 weeks to clean up everything. Subject 005. We let him have his phone but no service. No one to call, but he could play his games. We even put a game console, but that proved to be even worse. It made him lose after not even 8 minutes. He scratched and scratched, not even realizing we were talking to him. When he realized he was too weak to even get up, scalping his muscles out of his body, his veins. The things I've seen in the past month have made me question a lot about the human body, its limits, its potential, its everything. It was, in a way, it was incredible, incredibly disgusting and putrid, but it was amazing, the sheer will of what we can accomplish. Sorry again, I'm getting sidetracked. And 006, what she did whilst she was distracting herself with television white noises. She was a yoga teacher. She knew how to relax, stay calm and all that. She had a tumor in her brain, unfortunately. And as I've said, she lasted the longest, but without even realizing she had digged her own brain out of her head in the tumor. We have a few theories now about what the gas actually could be. Since we don't exactly know, all we know is that it can work. We think it could be a type of invasive hive that attacks abnormalities in the human body. A simple self-correcting gas that heals and destroys the diseases and such. It all comes back to destroying and healing the body. 15:31. Oliver has started humming to himself the song Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash. I asked him, Oliver, what are you going to do after this? This is something I had asked most people who had made it past 20 minutes. I may have seemed like a bad man. I know a lot of people would have probably seen it like this, if I wasn't the one telling the story, but I did care for these people. I hoped nothing but the best for them. I wished for them to succeed. I wished for this drug to succeed. This would cure the world. A lot of them mostly answered with getting back with their family, lovers, make a successful life for helping people, only for me to see the colors of their eyes leave this world, having left their families quicker than expected. Of course, I couldn't get attached to them, because this was a professional place. I tried not to, but people fighting for their lives. It's inspiring, even if I'm getting sidetracked again. I apologize. Oliver responded a bit tense. Oh, I might launch my own restaurant. I heard a lot about food healing. You should be surprised by what food can actually do for you. That sounds lovely. I would love to visit it. The words "if you make it" almost slipped out. But I held myself back. I couldn't stress him more at all. He needed to focus. He had to make it out. 15:35. It was almost time. I could see Oliver getting more tense. The anger was rising, but he was holding it together. What I didn't tell you before is that it wasn't just Oliver that was being watched. It was us too. At first I could never have told you why. Thankfully, that's why I'm still writing this. I don't care if they find me. Not anymore. I sent it far away. Someone will find it. Hopefully someone good. I'll tell the world what happened to all of them, what happened to the others. 007 was a younger child. Around 12. His parents had unfortunately ended their lives after finding out that their child was only going to live for another month. I never saw him agree to anything. I never saw him sign anything. I was only told about his parents. I didn't like it, but the thought of saving a child, I didn't mind it. Maybe the gas was less effective on him. It wasn't. God, it wasn't. He broke the television screen and scratched his skin with a piece of glass, hitting and splitting all of his veins. 008. Used the fork we gave him for food. First it was the inside of his cheek. Scratched until blood and skin fell out. I believe even 5 teeth were found. Some skin off of his arms and legs. Nails. He even stabbed one of his finger, prying it off of him. And without even noticing, he was scratching himself in the chest until he reached his heart. The fork was bent inside of his chest. He died the minute after. 009. 15:39. Oliver was passing around the room. He was struggling. He wasn't exactly hiding it anymore. He tightened his fists. We know what would happen if we tried to communicate with him, but we had to remind him, just in case. Oliver. Don't stitch. Oh, don't scratch the fucking itch. I know. You don't need to fucking repeat it. I apologize. Weirdly enough, this seemed to have reminded him of what was happening. He uncurled his fist and gripped the television. As hard as he could. He was sweating a lot. He needed something. What could I do though? I kept looking around the room and back at Oliver, hoping I could help him, but I couldn't. I had to let him do this. 15:40. Oh, can you hem? Remind me why you guys do this. My eyes widened a bit. I weirdly felt proud. I picked up the microphone and spoke out. Yeah. Of course. We do this because this experimental drug is something we have never seen before. The other subjects unfortunately passed away, but the gas had done its work. It removed their diseases. Oh, but they died, right? They did, but I believe that only one person needs to make it through this, and its subtle help quite literally everyone in the world. I can guarantee it, but it's definitely one of the best steps in medicine anyone could take, and you only have 20 minutes and 29 seconds left. He started nodding, agreeing with what I was saying. 15:41. I get it. I said I'm important to you guys right now. Maybe even humanity. What an honor. He chuckled to himself, gripping onto the TV even more. I'm pretty sure I could see the bent in it. In case of emergency. In case of anything. Gas leak. Anything, I had a button to stop everything. I wanted to push it. I wanted this man to live the rest of his life. My boss would have definitely been mad. Even probably fired me, if not killed me. I had a lot of information about this place that could shut everything down. I've since then hated myself for not stopping it. He could have lived a normal life. 15:45. Oliver had officially broken the record, but he also dented the television. In the last few minutes or so, he broke the television, ripped the couch apart, threw his plate at the wall, and now he was gripping onto what was left of the couch, and he was yelling, in pain. The itch was getting into his head. Even I could feel it. But of course mine was fake. It wasn't real. 15:49. Oliver was yelling until his voice went quiet. He took raspy breaths, attempting to get all of his anger and temptation out of his body. His arm went limp. I was afraid he was going to lose it like 003. His brain might damage itself with everything he's doing. I kept peeking at the button, knowing I could. But he was doing so well, I just had to keep him going. 15:51. I was about to open the microphone again, telling him to hang on, but his entire body went limp, falling to the ground with a loud bang. I asked out, "Oliver? Are you okay, Oliver? Please answer me. Come on." This wasn't the first person we had lost yet. It felt like someone close. I closed my documents and my notes. Time of death. 15:51. New record. 50 minutes. 15:53. I heard a loud coughing and gasping in the other room as I was about to leave. I looked up and immediately ran back over to look through. It was Oliver. He was alive. He was standing up. I could see blood pumping out of his ears, nose and mouth. I gripped the microphone. "Oliver, can you hear me? Are you all right?" He stood there for a moment, seeming like he was lost, but he quickly regained his memories as he spoke out. "Oh, my body feels lighter. I can breathe so easily. I can smell so perfectly. I can feel everything that cyst touching me." He took one of the deepest breaths I have ever heard. 15:54. He cleaned the blood off of his body and walked up to the window, looking at me. He smiled. 15:55. The treatment had worked, or it was finalizing. The world could become a better place. For everyone. No more diseases. No more. 15:56. I was a bit confused as to why. We were told the treatment was a full hour. Everything seemed fine until the door finally opened. 15:57. I remember everything that had happened in those few seconds. I remember seeing those two guards walking in, and they opened fire on Oliver, unloading their magazines into him. I had taken cover as some of the bullets pierced the glass. What the hell? Why would they shoot him? He cured himself. He freed himself. He could have lived longer. 15:58. Afterwards, I poked my head out to see Oliver still standing. I looked at him and saw he was still alive. He could move, talk, and do everything. Only he had about 20 holes punctured in his body. "Oh, Oliver?" He looked back at me and smiled. He fell over, his blood leaking out of his body. 15:59. They killed him. I remember seeing his eyes leaving our world. I looked up at the guards. "Why the hell did you do that? What sip's wrong with you?" He made it. The guards looked at me and stepped up. Guard 009 had to be terminated for safety reasons. He came back. What does that mean? He was fine. Guard. Step back, doctor. They had raised their guns at me. I instinctively stepped back, my foot hitting the corpse of the man I once hoped that he was the one that could make it out of this. What was all of this for then? Yusuf kept all of us in the dark about this project. If it's not meant to be a cure for humanity, what the hell is it supposed to be? The guards put their fingers on the triggers ready to fire, until Oliver suddenly stood back up. His wounds had recovered. 16:01. Guard. The procedure was to make him immortal. His cells are no longer capable of being damaged, not permanently. Oliver looked up at his body. Seeing the holes close up on their own, he started walking past me, and the guards began gunning him down again. I had to move out of the way. A bullet grazed me, but I was fine. Oliver took their guns, and in an instant I couldn't hear their voices anymore. I looked up to him to see that he had murdered both of them in a single motion. Everything afterwards happened so fast. He ran out of the building, and I assumed he escaped because not one of the corpses we found was his. As of October 20th, 2018, the program was shut down. We were let go. What remained of the staff? But I do believe we are being watched, ready to be taken out, if needed. I'm writing this in case you read this. Oliver, Whatever you've become, don't let them find you. I'm not sure who you can trust today, but you have a gift. It'd be wise to let people know about it. I'm not sure who though. I'm sorry. I believe they've caught on to what I'm doing. So I believe this is all I can say. I might die tonight. Who knows? I've done my part for the world. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the boarding house. It wasn't the air, though it felt heavier than it should have been. It wasn't the lighting, though the dim yellow bulbs flickered as if struggling to stay awake. It wasn't even the silence, though it was the kind that pressed against my ears, thick and expectant. No, it was something else, something deeper, something unseen. An unsettling sensation crawled under my skin, cold and unshakable, like the walls themselves were watching, whispering, in a language I couldn't hear. I had walked into a place that didn't want me there. The landlady, Mrs. Carter, stood behind the counter, her frail hands folded neatly in front of her. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, as though time had carved its story into her skin. Her grey eyes, dull, unreadable, rested on me in a way that made my stomach tighten. She said nothing at first, just reached under the counter and handed me a small brass key, along with a neatly folded piece of paper. Her fingers lingered on the edges of the paper. As I took it from her, "Read this carefully," she said, her voice quiet, measured, and follow every rule. There was no warmth in her words, no unnecessary pleasantries, just a warning wrapped in a simple instruction. I hesitated, glancing toward the wall near the entrance. A faded list of rules was taped there, its edges curling with age, the ink smudged and uneven. I barely glanced at it, assuming it was the usual. No smoking, no loud music, no guests after 10 p.m. I should have paid more attention. I should have stopped and read every word. Instead, I unfolded the paper in my hands, and as my eyes scanned the list, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. Boarding house rules. Lock your door before midnight. Do not open it for anyone until sunrise. If you hear knocking past midnight, ignore it. No matter who they claim to be, they are not real. Always greet the old man in room 7. If you see him in the hallway, if he doesn't greet you back, hide in the nearest room immediately. Do not eat food left outside your door. No one in this house leaves food for others. If you wake up and feel someone watching you, do not move. Do not speak. Close your eyes until morning. If you hear the landlady humming past midnight, do not look out of your window. Do not let her know you are awake. My hands tightened around the paper, the words blurring slightly as I reread them. My mouth felt dry. "This isn't a joke, is it?" I asked, my voice quieter than I had intended. Mrs. Carter didn't answer immediately. She only studied me, her expression blank, before shaking her head once. "Follow the rules. You sit'll be fine," she repeated. And just like that, she turned and walked away, her slow, deliberate steps echoing down the hallway. I stood there, my heart hammering. The paper felt heavier in my hands now. My mind told me it was ridiculous. Some weird tradition, an old superstition meant to scare new tenants. But deep down, somewhere in the part of my brain that still clung to instinct, I knew I had just made a terrible mistake by moving in. I went to my room. It was small but clean. A bed, a wooden desk, a single chair near the window. The walls were a dull beige, bare, except for a single painting of a forest that looked too dark, too deep. I ran a hand along the desk's surface, dust-free. Everything was strangely spotless, as if no one had truly lived here before. The walls were thin. I could hear faint shuffling, the quiet murmurs of my neighbors settling in for the night. A floorboard creaked. Somewhere in the hallway, I swallowed hard and double-checked my door, twisting the lock with a sharp click. Then, I climbed into bed, the folded paper resting on the nightstand beside me. The rules ran through my mind like a looping whisper. I wasn't sure how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling. At some point, My eyelids grew heavy. Sleep crept in. The silence of the room wrapped around me like a thick fog. And then I heard something. A knock. Again and again. My eyes snapped open. A cold wave of fear crashed through me. A voice followed. "Hey man. It's Adam. My key isn't working. Can you open up?" Adam, my next door neighbor. I had met him earlier. Friendly, talkative, the kind of guy who could make any place feel normal. He had been here for 3 months. He had been here for 3 months. He had smiled when he introduced himself. He had seemed real. But the second rule echoed in my mind. If you hear knocking past midnight, ignore it. No matter who they claim to be, they are not real. I gripped the blanket, my breath shallow. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. Knock, knock, knock. Adam's voice again. This time, there was a slight edge to it. "Come on, man. I just need you to open the door for a second. Please." I almost answered. Almost. But something was wrong. His voice. It sounded close, too close, like he was whispering right against the wood. And yet, there was something else. A flatness, a hollowness. Like an imitation of a voice, someone trying to sound like Adam but failing in the smallest, most unnatural ways. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay silent. The knocking stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. For the rest of the night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sun to rise. The next morning I stepped into the hallway, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing on me. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak of the floor, every distant sound in the walls, every whisper of wind outside had kept me frozen beneath my blanket, listening, waiting for something I couldn't see. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a temporary escape, like something was letting me go, just for a little while. The hallway was quiet, bathed in dull gray light, filtering in from a small dust-covered window at the end of the corridor. I turned toward the kitchen, the thought of coffee, the only thing keeping me upright. And then, I saw him, the old man from room 7. He stood completely still in the middle of the hallway, his frail frame wrapped in a tattered, oversized sweater that hung off his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. His skin was pale, almost gray, stretched too thin over sharp cheekbones. His lips were cracked, and his eyes, dark, sunken, hollow. They stared at me, unblinking. The air shifted. A chill ran up my spine, sharp and immediate. I forced myself to speak. "Good morning." The words felt small, insignificant against the weight of the silence between us. He didn't respond. My throat tightened. Always greet the old man in room 7. If he doesn't greet you back, hide immediately. Third rule flashed in my mind. My pulse quickened. I glanced around, searching for the nearest door, calculating how fast I could reach it. The hallway stretched longer than it had before. Or maybe that was just my fear twisting reality. Seconds dragged. The silence felt alive, pressing against my skin. Then, finally he moved. A slow, deliberate nod. No words, no expression. Just that single motion before he turned, shuffling toward his door. I let out a shaky breath. I had followed the rule, but as his door clicked shut behind him, a cold thought crawled into my mind. What would have happened if I hadn't? Well, shaking off that clingy feeling, I went to work. That evening I returned from work, exhausted. The day had been long, but my mind had been longer. I had spent most of it replaying the morning, the old man's face, the weight of that silence. I told myself I was overreacting. It was just an old man, just a weird set of rules. That was all. But when I reached my door, I stopped. A plate of food sat neatly on the floor, a bowl of soup and a slice of bread. My stomach twisted, hunger gnawing at me after skipping breakfast and barely touching lunch. My first thought was maybe Mrs. Carter left it. Maybe it was some sort of welcome gesture. And then my fingers curled into fists as I repeated the rule number 4 in my head. Do not eat food left outside your door. No one in this house leaves food for others. I swallowed hard. The hallway was empty. I bent down, hesitating. Before picking up the plate, the ceramic was cool, the silver lid covering the bowl gleaming under the dim hallway light. The smell of something familiar, something faintly metallic, drifted up. My unease deepened. I carried the plate to the kitchen, every step heavier than the last. I wasn't going to eat it, obviously, but I needed to see what was inside. With a slow breath, I lifted the lid. The stench hit me instantly. Rotting meat. Foul. Wet. Wrong. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't soup. It was something thick, dark, clotted in strange pulsing lumps. Something moved beneath the surface, shifting sluggishly like it was alive but struggling to stay that way. I gagged, my hands trembling as I hurled the plate into the trash, the bowl shattering against the inside of the bin. The stench lingered, curling into my nostrils, clinging to the back of my throat. I turned to leave, and then I saw him, the old man from room 7, standing in the hallway, watching me. His face was blank, unreadable. Then, slowly, deliberately, he nodded once and walked away. That night, I lay in bed. Every muscle in my body was tense. I had locked the door. I had checked it twice. I had pulled the blanket up to my chin like it could protect me from whatever lurked beyond these walls. But none of that mattered. Not really, because something was wrong in this house. And then, at exactly 3:12 a.m., I heard it. A soft humming, drifting through the hallway like a lullaby meant for something else. My stomach twisted. I knew that tune. I had heard it earlier that day. Mrs. Carter, humming to herself as she wiped the counter, her voice light and distant. It had seemed harmless then. But now, it feels different. The sound grew clearer, threading its way through the thin walls, curling into the cracks of my room like smoke. It was calm, slow, too slow, like someone drawing out each note deliberately. And the 6th rule says, if you hear the landlady humming past midnight, do not look out of your window. Do not let her know you are awake. I gripped my blanket, my pulse hammering in my ears. Don't look, don't move. The humming grew louder and closer. And then, footsteps. Soft, measured, dragging lightly across the wooden floor outside my room. Each step deliberate, stretching out the distance between them, like whoever was walking was listening for something. They stopped, right outside my door. My breath caught in my throat. The door, locked. It was locked, but the footsteps didn't leave. And then the doorknob rattled. A slow, testing turn. Once, my entire body locked up. I clenched my eyes shut, forcing myself not to move, not to breathe too loud, not to exist in that moment. Maybe if I stayed still enough, she would go away. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the humming stopped. The air in the room felt suffocating, thick with something unseen. For a long, agonizing moment, silence. And then, a whisper, soft, right outside the door. I know you stir awake. A cold shiver crawled down my spine, sinking deep into my bones. I didn't bait react. I didn't bait move. I couldn't stare. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then finally, footsteps again, moving away, slow, measured. The humming started up once more, fading, drifting down the hallway, melting into the night. I lay there, frozen, staring into the darkness until morning. By the next evening, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I couldn't stay in this house. Not after last night. Not after the rules kept proving themselves real. I shoved my clothes into my bag, my hands shaking, my mind screaming at me to hurry. Just get out. Don't look back. Don't question it. Just leave. But as I stepped into the hallway, a cold wave of dread washed over me. I froze. At the far end of the hall, the old man from room 7 stood perfectly still. His frail frame seemed smaller in the dim light. His hollow eyes locked onto me, waiting, watching. I swallowed hard. Greet him. Say something. Good evening, I forced out. My voice tight. Silence. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't dare to greet me back. My stomach twisted violently. If he doesn't greet you back, hide in the nearest room immediately. I turned, heart hammering, scanning for an open door, any door. But before I could move, the hallway lights flickered. A deep, wet breathing sound slithered through the air, thick and unnatural, coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. And then, something shifted in the shadows. The space at the end of the hall stretched, as if the walls were bending, pulling apart. Something was there. Something big. Something wrong. The nearest door creaked open. I didn't dare hesitate. I ran. I dove inside and slammed the door shut behind me. From outside, a dragging sound came. Slow. Heavy. Scraping against the floor. Something was moving down the hallway. And then, knock. Knock. I squeezed my eyes shut. No, not again. A voice muffled through the door. Hey man, it's Adam. My key isn't set working. Can you open up? I clamped a hand over my mouth. Not real. It's not real. The knocking didn't stop. Knock. Knock. My breath hitched in my throat, every muscle in my body screaming, stay silent. Then, a pause. A whisper, right against the door. I know you stir awake. The lights in the room flickered, and then the door handle started to turn. The handle twisted. The door swung open, and something unseen, something cold, something hungry, grabbed me. The air rushed out of my lungs as an invisible force dragged me forward. The walls twisted, stretched, swallowed me whole. Darkness, pressure, like I had fallen into something deep, something endless, something that didn't want to let go. I tried to scream, but there was no sound, no air, no me. I don't remember what happened after that, but when I woke up in the morning, my room was still there. My bags still packed. The bed untouched. But I was gone. Outside room 7, a fresh piece of paper was taped to the wall. The rules unchanged, except for one. A new line, written in dark, uneven letters, pressed deep into the page. If you hear someone knocking and claiming to be the new tenant, ignore them. They are not real. Annabeth was sitting on her couch, deep in thought. She had watched her favorite TV show, baked herself some muffins and ate them up, and now she felt rather bored. Suddenly, as her eyes were sweeping the room, she noticed something unusual, something that wasn't there before. A note, laying beside her on the couch. It contained only 4 words. Let's sit play a game. Annabeth glanced around the room, suddenly feeling afraid. She lived alone. So, where did the note come from? And then she understood. Her longtime boyfriend Luke had a duplicate of her apartment keys. He must have snuck in somehow, without her noticing. A smile of relief broke across her face. She got to her knees and peeked under the couch, hoping to catch Luke off guard. But he wasn't there. Annabeth straightened up, and once again examined the room thoroughly. She was absolutely sure Luke was hiding somewhere. When her eyes went to the couch again, she saw another note beside the first one. Oh cool. You want to play hide and seek? Do you want to be the seeker? Haha. Very funny, Luke. Somewhat creepy even. That's enough. You can come out now. Annabeth called out. No response. Just come out. I'm going to find you anyway, she said. And then she noticed a third note. She picked it up and read it. I guess that's settled then. I'm going to hide, and you're going to try and find me. Good luck. Annabeth rolled her eyes. Fine, if you insist. She began the search. She checked under her bed, inside her wardrobe, took another look under the couch, checked behind the shower curtain, even took a look inside the washing machine and the dishwasher. No sign of Luke. She was completely baffled, and then, when she was about to give up, she remembered that there was one place she forgot to check. It was the closet in her bedroom. It was small, and Annabeth doubted that Luke would fit there. But it seemed to be the last hiding place in the house left unchecked. She approached the closet and opened it. She gasped and took a step backwards. There definitely was someone inside the closet, but it wasn't Luke. It was a girl, no older than 10, her back turned to Annabeth. You found me, she said, addressing Annabeth, who was too shocked to respond. And now, she continued, her voice turning into a menacing, almost hungry whisper. It's your turn to hide. And then she turned around. Annabeth screamed. The girl's eyes were two black voids with tiny red dots for pupils. Her grin was unnaturally wide, and her right hand, the one that wasn't clutching the teddy bear, was holding a big, long, sharp knife. Suddenly the lights in Annabeth's entire apartment went out. She reached for the light switch, but no matter how much she clicked it, the room remained dark. Meanwhile, the thing in the closet began counting. 1, 2, 3. Annabeth sprinted down the hallway to the apartment door and tried to unlock it, but to no avail. The door remained locked and shut, no matter what she did. 6, 7, 8. Annabeth jumped into the wardrobe, closed the door and concealed herself behind the clothes. She dared not even breathe. She had a feeling that if the monstrous girl will find her, something very bad will happen. She heard light footsteps treading down the hallway. She closed her eyes. Something yanked the door of the wardrobe open and began throwing out the clothes. Found you. The girl Sip's voice cooed. Annabeth's final scream was drowned out by the girl's laughter. It had been the summer of that year. 6 full weeks to piss about and do absolutely nothing. So, when a good friend of mine extended his usual invite to hang about at his house, how could I say no? His house was one of those old farmhouses. Not quite decrepit, but certainly not far off it. 16 acres of land sprawling across the British countryside, that most notably led out into a wood. There had been all sorts of stories about it, or at least my friend told me so. Did I take him seriously? No. Of course I didn't. Looking back on it, I don't even think he was taking himself seriously. It was all rubbish about ghosts and whatnot. Some poor woman had hung herself however long ago, and her wailing spirit had wandered betwixt the trees ever since. I don't really remember the details. It's been a while since this all happened. The dusk faded as the sun fell below the horizon. The plan had been simple. We would sneak out after his parents fell asleep, and kick about in the woods. We were never the smartest bunch, to be honest. It was the closest we could get to camping. And I guess that's all the incentive we needed. Darkness swallowed what had been left of the light, and we sat in the garden. There had been 3 of us that night. From memory, we told stories or something. Again, it's been a while. We saw the lights in the house dissipate, and we were left the dull crackle of the fire and the soft glow of its dying embers. With a somewhat startling clap of his hands, Richard jolted from his seat. Right then, my dear friends, let's get to work. His tone was clearly mocking. Josh hadn't been looking so hot all night, and whether that was from fear or his overconsumption of marshmallows, I couldn't tell, though the answer is pretty obvious, looking back on it. The 2 of them had been my good friends for years. They'd been with me through everything you could think of, bullying, breakups, and broken bones included. I gave Josh a reassuring pat on the back, and the 3 of us started towards the woods. Silence permeated the expedition. I think we were all scared shitless, and just far too proud to admit it. I liked the woods. During the day, that is when the crunch of a leaf or the snap of a twig doesn't send you reeling in search of an imaginary murderous cannibal. We had been moving in silence for maybe 10 minutes. When Josh spoke up. "This is boring. Can we just go back and—" His voice was cut off abruptly by Richard, who in a low whisper and through gritted teeth said, "Hey, shut up. You think we sit being quiet because we want to?" He cocked his head, and I could see the panicked expression carved onto his face. He held a pale finger to his lips. "I don't want to get done in by the gamekeeper. These woods aren't fed all mine." And well, they say he said's a bit crazy. The irony of his condemnation of speech was funny to me at the time. After all, we were shining flashlights through the trees like lunatics. Even now, I doubt being quiet would have kept us concealed. Over tree trunk and river we crept, and I began to question Richard's decision to leave out the crazy gamekeeper and why we'd really come out in the first place. Our flashlights illuminated the suffocating confines of the darkness. Like headlights, they searched over tree after tree after. Then there they were, 3 tallies, carved like crooked fingers into the soft flesh of a single tree's trunk. I remember running my fingers through the grooves in the wood. They were rough and crude and seemingly pointless. We moved on soon after, the hysteria over the tally of dooms fading back into the usual silence. Boredom had set in. Why exactly had Richard made us come out here, and why had we obliged? I had thought at the big age of 13, I was a grown-up, spared from fear. How wrong I'd been. The enforced silence made it worse. I had heard every creak in the trees, every muntjack's howl as it pierced the silence like a bullet, and every footstep upturning freshly fallen leaves. Step after step, my feet ached. I hadn't brought my walking shoes, and that had been my main concern at the time. By this point, I had the rhythm of our steps down. Richard had heavier steps, whilst Josh had lighter ones, and well, I knew my own. That's why I found it so odd when a 4th set began crunching in the leaves somewhere behind us. The silence continued. I said nothing, as if ignoring it meant it wasn't happening. My flashlight groped the bark of the trees as I tried to block out the thought of the gamekeeper being behind me. But then there it was again. The trio of tallies. Richard looked up and let out a sigh, and muttered a series of incessant swears. "God damn it!" His voice echoed of the trees, and through the empty air. I opened my mouth to respond, but in his usual fashion, he silenced me with a wild gesture. "Look, I don't just want to hear it. I know we have gone in circles and whatever. I just went the wrong way, that's it's all." A fruitless attempt to quiet the discontent arising in our party. It reassured me even less than it had him. I turned to Josh, and we exchanged some whispered banter at the expense of our not-so-gracious tour guide, who had already taken off into the dark, this time in the opposite direction. Together, we walked for maybe another 20 minutes. Time wasn't really a concept in that endless darkness. I was contented, I suppose. At the very least, our footsteps were once again very much alone. Soon we swapped the scenery for a dewy field. We'd reached the forest's boundary. We all sighed in relief, far more startled than we were letting on, or at least I was. Richard pointed to the far side of the clearing, to a cluster of trees doing a poor job of concealing a lake hiding behind them, like a toddler playing hide and seek. This is what he had wanted to show us, and to his credit, it was beautiful. We started into the grass. It was taller than us, or at least it felt like it was. 1 foot after the other, we snuck closer and closer to our journey's end. I couldn't see my companions. They, like me, were having just so much fun traversing the grasping confines of wet grass. Coughing and spluttering, I, like a cascade, crashed out from the field and right back into familiar surroundings. The woods. Thorns and nettles pricked at my backside as I pulled myself from their grip and to my feet. Soon after me came Josh in a similar fashion. I had helped him to his feet, expecting the third of our band to emerge, and yet, but he never did. My best friend, for years, through everything, and the last I would know of him was a scream. Like a miasma, it hung in the air, almost tangible, and for what seemed like an eternity, we stood there, frozen and unable to react. Josh's jaw was slack, and his words came out a barely perceivable cacophony of whimpers and cries. "The gamekeeper," Is it him? You heard those footsteps before, right? I said nothing, and did nothing. Not a word in any language could have or would have reassured either him or me. Our eyes locked for but a moment, as another scream tore through the silence, followed by a great tumult from the woods in which we stood. Back into the grass we ran, tearing, ripping, and weaving through the blades as they tried to constrict us and deliver us to the same fate as our friend. Into a clearing I collapsed. The bank of the lake stretched out in front of me, a journey's end. Silence was all that followed me. I turned and shone my flashlight, like a lighthouse in a storm, and prayed it would lead Josh straight to me, but it never did. Alone with my thoughts, I slumped on that desolate bank, the water still and calm. I looked out into the dark. Despite the valiant efforts of my flashlight, it did not penetrate the void of the lake. I threw a pebble into the surface and wept. I wanted my mum. I wanted to go home. I remember thinking of all the possibilities, that my friends were dead, murdered by some crazy old bastard in the woods, and soon I would join them. I don't know how long I sat there, throwing pebbles into that mirror as it reflected my sorry state. I don't know how long I muttered that lament for my friends. Tears stung the corners of my eyes as they carved their way down my flushed cheeks. The ripples of the impacted water came back to me until I ran out of stones to throw. From that place I did not want to stir. I did not want to face what was in those woods, whether it was the crazed gamekeeper or the ghosts. And in a selfish way I didn't care. I had wanted the mud of the bank to engulf me, or for me to wake up entirely. I quietly begged it had all just a Ben nightmare. With my head in my hands, I began to drift into sleep, my tears using my hands as a slide to fall and dilute into the mud. Once again, I fell into a rhythm, a twisted lullaby, as I faded in and out of consciousness. The rustling of the leaves and the wind, as it caressed the trees soothing me. Then came a soft rippling of the water. It had been at least 20 minutes since I cast my last stone. The intensity of the rippling increased and I scrambled to my feet. Whatever had taken my friends was now here for me. Up the bank I fled, and yet I could not. It had been far easier to come down than it was to get back up. The mud turned to slop under my grasp, and I slipped and writhed as I desperately tried to clamber to my salvation. My fingers tugged on the blades of grass at the bank's pinnacle. They ripped and tore as I failed to pull myself up and over. Please, no. Leave me alone. I began to plead with whatever was behind me. My voice was shrill, and now more than ever my tears stung. Silent went the world at my cries. The rippling altogether stopped, and I kept my face buried in the damp earth. Seconds, minutes, hours passed. I don't even know how long it was before I turned around, and I wish I never did. The water ran sanguine as a mass drifted onto the shore. Not long congealed blood clung to its face, glinting in response to my abandoned flashlight's beam. Out of their sockets, its eyes bulged. Pupils dilated into deep, blackened, moon-shaped pools. Twisted was its mouth. Teeth missing, whether from age or death I could not tell. It seemed to scream at me, and I screamed back. The police found me on the bank the next morning. And to be honest, I don't remember what happened after or before they did. My friends, much like me, were soon found. And after the events of that night, we kind of drifted in and out of friendship. A shame, I suppose, but I guess it was for the best. It's been maybe 7 or 8 odd years now since that night, and I've never really moved on. The woods were fully searched, and of course the body that found me on the bank was the gamekeeper. He'd been missing for a week. That fact had all but confirmed my worst fears. There had been someone or something in those woods with us that night. I went to therapy, and to some support groups, and well, perhaps I would have forgotten about it entirely. I mean, after the first few years I did, repressed in the deepest recesses of my brain. I kept it, until today. For the first time in my life, I no longer live with my parents. I found a farmhouse for rent out in the countryside close to my university. Eerily cheap. And now I suppose I know the reason. Today I stepped outside. And I don't know why. I was pulled, like it was a pre-existing thought. If you get what I mean. My new abode leads out into the woods, and on the tree nearest my property were 2 tallies. I stepped into the black building, my girlfriend by my side. The lights were dim as we headed for the elevator. I briefly recalled what she said earlier about this city having a lot of haunted buildings, but tried to set that thought aside. "So you guys do this a lot?" I asked. "Yeah, it's a very popular activity," my girlfriend said cheerfully. The elevator stopped on the 4th floor, and we stepped out, walking down dimly lit corridors. We arrived at room 414. We stepped inside, and my girlfriend smiled from ear to ear. All her friends were inside, and she hadn't seen them for quite some time. This was also my first time meeting them. Happiness filled the air, and beer bottles filled the tables. I met her cousin. He was a pretty cool guy. We communicated through translator apps, despite the language barrier. I still felt that I got along with him well. Some people just give off a good vibe. The strobe lights in the room danced as they gleefully sang along to their favorite songs. I couldn't really participate, but I still had a good time regardless. After all, it was a new experience for me. I did sing some duets with my girlfriend when she'd occasionally pick an English pop song. I had no musical talent, so it was slightly embarrassing, but I'll get over it. After a while, I had to go to the bathroom. I had no clue where it was, so I asked my girlfriend to go with me. We walked down a few hallways until we found it. I took her with me because I was afraid I would get lost going back to the room. I'm very directionally impaired. That is, in fact, what happened. When I was done, I stepped outside the restroom. I waited around for a little bit for my girlfriend, and after a few minutes I decided she must have gone back to the room. I wandered the halls, but I got turned around. All the rooms looked the same to me. I couldn't seem to figure out which way I came from. As I wandered the halls, I noticed how quiet it is. Before, I could hear plenty of people singing from different rooms. And speaking of people, I hadn't seen anybody this entire time I've been walking about until I turned the corner. Rounding the corner in a panic, I completely stopped in my tracks. Standing at the edge of the hallway was a man. He was dressed normally, and everything about him appeared normal, except he stared, eyes completely open, just staring. A chill ran down my spine. I did not want to go near him. In a daze, I stepped into a random room. Sitting on the furniture were these strange things. I think they wore masks or some sort of costume, but the facial expressions were far too realistic. It was uncanny. They were pale white, covered in fur, and they wore suits. Their faces were cat-like, the way they stared. It was pure disdain. I felt like a bug just waited to be squashed. Slamming the door, I ran back the other way and finally had some luck. I noticed the door I had just exited was room 416, so I darted down towards room 414, yanking the door open. I was met with an empty room. No sign of anybody even having been here. No beer bottles, no food. Even my jacket I had left in the chair was gone. Puzzled, I frantically pondered what to do when I noticed something on the screen, a timer with no set number. I looked over at the door. Peering in the small window was that man from before. I heard the door lock from the outside. The man in the window looked at me. I watched his gaze shift, transfixing on the screen before me. He kept moving his head, motioning towards it. Why was he motioning towards the TV? What was up with the infinite timer on the screen? The strange man continued to motion towards the television. I eventually got the message. I selected a song and nervously began to sing. My eyes shifted back and forth to the man. He looked pleased now. A smile appeared on his face. After the song finished, the screen changed. The timer blinked. It now read 1 million. I had no idea how I ended up in this predicament, but I understood what I had to do. I continued singing, song after song. The whole time, the man watched in glee. It was strange. I never grew hungry or needed to use the bathroom. It was as if I was frozen in time. This continued for ages. I soon came to realize those numbers represented years, if ever I stopped. The timer paused too. I had to keep singing if I ever wanted to get out of here. I sang for longer than any human has ever been alive. for longer than any human civilization has lasted. I felt enraged at the scenario. I'd often daydreamed of being able to just freeze everything and read my books. Having all the time in the world, this would have been the perfect opportunity. But instead I was forced to sing karaoke songs by myself. I've sung and memorized every popular song possibly ever released, at least at the time of my imprisonment. I've learned every main language in the world and can speak them fluently. I had to find some way to bide the time besides just singing after all. I'd sing a song in a language I didn't know for years and then switch to an English version of the same song. I'd perfected my singing chops too. I could sing and rap flawlessly. After longer than anyone could even dream of, I was done. Hey babe, you were in the bathroom a long time. Are you okay? My girlfriend said with a concerned look on her face. One look at her, and I started bawling. I wrapped my arms around her and hugged her tight. She would never know what I'd experienced. I couldn't tell her. How would she believe me? And if she did believe me, I didn't want to break her spirit. She was the most positive person I knew. I had to move on somehow. But I live in fear. It may seem like I can live a wonderful life, having possibly the most beautiful singing voice in human history, and knowing so many languages. It would seem that I can do anything I set my mind to at this point. But everywhere I look, around every corner, I still see that man, those eyes peering at me when I'm not looking. I'll never escape them.